The first hint of dawn crept across the Tunisian desert, painting the eastern sky in bands of amber and gold. Captain Richard Steele Morgan lowered his binoculars and squinted toward the horizon. A thin cloud of dust rose in the distance, barely visible in the early light, but unmistakable to a veteran's eye. German tanks. Right on schedule, he muttered, his weathered face betraying no emotion. At 42, Morgan was older than most company commanders. Deep lines etched around his eyes spoke of years under harsh sun and harsher circumstances. His salt and pepper hair, cropped in military short, peeked from beneath his helmet. The men called him Steel behind his back, a nickname earned not just from his 20 years working Detroit assembly lines before the war, but from an unbreakable resolve that had kept Alpha Company alive through months of brutal North African fighting. Morgan stood atop a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley near Guettar. Behind him, carefully concealed among the terrain, sat the 17 M3 gun motor carriages of his tank destroyer unit. The morning light glinted off their 75mm French cannons, weapons that had proven woefully inadequate against German armor at Kasserine Pass just weeks earlier. The February disaster had cost American forces over 5,000 casualties and shattered their reputation among Allied forces. The M3s were little more than converted half-tracks with a French 75mm gun mounted in an open compartment. Their official designation was gun motor carriage, but the men had less flattering names for them. Death traps was among the more polite terms. With only quarter-inch armor plating, they offered scant protection against German 88s or even machine gun fire. But they were fast, pushing 45 miles per hour on good terrain, and their 75mm gun could punch through 3 inches of armor at 1,000 yards if the gunner knew what he was doing. Morgan knew every specification, every strength and weakness of the M3. Before the war, he'd been a mechanical engineer at the Chrysler plant, part of the team that helped convert automobile factories to tank production. He understood machines and metal the way some men understood words or music. This knowledge had saved lives at Kasserine, allowing him to guide his surviving vehicles to safety when the German panzers had torn through American lines like paper. "Captain Morgan, sir." Morgan turned to see his radio man, Private James Wilson, climbing up the rocky slope toward him. "Message from HQ, sir. General Patton wants confirmation that we're in position." Morgan nodded. George S. Patton had taken command of 2 Corps after Kasserine, replacing the disgraced Major General Lloyd Fredendall. The change in leadership had been immediate and jarring. Where Fredendall had commanded from a bunker 50 miles from the front, Patton was everywhere, his ivory-handled revolvers and polished helmet making him impossible to miss. "Tell them Alpha Company is in position and awaiting contact," Morgan replied, his voice gravelly from years of cigarettes and desert dust. Wilson hesitated. "Sir, Colonel Williams also sent a message. He suggests that we consider falling back to the secondary position given the estimated enemy strength." Morgan's jaw tightened. Colonel Frank Williams, their battalion commander, had never seen actual combat. He'd spent the war thus far behind a desk in Algiers, only arriving at the front after Patton's purge of rear echelon officers. "Tell Colonel Williams we're staying put. General Patton's orders were explicit. No retreating, no surrendering." Direct quote. The radio man nodded and scrambled back down to his equipment. Morgan returned his gaze to the horizon and the approaching dust cloud. He pulled out a worn leather wallet and removed a photograph of a woman with 2 teenage girls, their smiling faces a stark contrast to the desolate landscape around him. Margaret had married him straight out of high school 24 years ago. She'd given him 2 beautiful daughters and supported his night school engineering studies. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, she hadn't protested when he enlisted, despite being overage. The Morgan family had served in every American conflict since the Civil War, when his grandfather had marched with Sherman. His own father had earned the Distinguished Service Cross in the trenches of France in 1918. That legacy weighed on him now as he studied the approaching German force. This wasn't just about surviving anymore, or even winning a battle. After Kasserine, the entire world doubted whether American soldiers could stand against Hitler's war machine. Today would be about proving something, not just to their British allies or German enemies, but to themselves. Morgan tucked the photo away and took one last survey of his positions. Alpha Company's M3s were dug into the hillside, only their gun barrels visible from the front. Their orders were simple but vital: protect the artillery batteries positioned behind them and prevent German armor from breaking through to Guettar and beyond. If they failed, the entire Allied flank would be exposed. The radio crackled to life. "Captain Morgan, Lieutenant Peterson requests your presence at the observation post, sir." Morgan made his way down the rocky slope to where his intelligence officer had established a forward observation post. Lieutenant James Harvard Peterson, a former history professor with a photographic memory and encyclopedic knowledge of German tactics, was peering through a spotting scope. "What do you see, Harvard?" Morgan asked, using the nickname the men had given the academic officer. "Panzer IVs, sir, at least a dozen that I can count, probably more behind them. Plus mechanized infantry, KFZ 251 half-tracks. I estimate at least a battalion of infantry." Morgan took the scope. The German column was still several miles away, but he could make out the distinctive silhouettes of the Panzer IV tanks, their long-barreled 75mm guns making them deadly opponents. These weren't the older models they'd faced before. These were Panzer IV Ausfuss G variants with thicker frontal armor and improved ammunition. "Any Tigers?" Morgan asked, referring to the new heavy tanks that had begun appearing on the Tunisian front. "No, sir, not that I can see, but the dust makes it difficult to be certain." Morgan handed back the scope. "Keep watching. I want to know the moment you identify their commander or see any changes in formation." As Morgan turned to go, Peterson spoke again. "Sir, there is something else. General Patton is here." Morgan followed Peterson's gesture and saw a group of vehicles approaching from the rear. Among them was an unmistakable Jeep with 3 stars on the license plate. The small convoy stopped at the command post, and a figure in a polished helmet stepped out. Even at this distance, there was no mistaking the ramrod posture and theatrical presence of George S. Patton. "Well, that complicates things," Morgan muttered, making his way down to meet the Corps commander. By the time Morgan reached the command post, Patton was already berating an unfortunate staff officer whose uniform apparently failed to meet standards. Colonel Williams stood nearby, his face a mask of nervous attention. "General Patton, sir, Captain Richard Morgan, commanding Alpha Company, 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion." Patton turned, his piercing eyes taking Morgan's measure in an instant. "Captain Morgan, your reputation precedes you. One of the few officers who got his men out of that Kasserine debacle." "We lost good men there, sir." "Yes, you did, because of incompetent leadership and poor training." Patton's voice carried enough to ensure everyone in the vicinity heard him. "That changes today. Where are your positions?" Morgan led Patton to a map board, indicating where his tank destroyers were stationed. "You've put them on the forward slope," Patton noted, studying the map. "Aggressive. I like it." Colonel Williams cleared his throat. "Sir, I was just explaining to General Patton that we might consider shifting to more defensible positions given the enemy strength reports." Patton's eyes narrowed. "Did I hear you correctly, Colonel? Are you suggesting retreat before the first shot is fired?" Williams paled. "No, sir, I merely thought—" "Don't think, Colonel. Fight." Patton turned back to Morgan. "Captain, your M3s are all that stand between the 10th Panzer Division and our artillery. Can you hold them?" Morgan met Patton's gaze directly. "Yes, sir, we can hold them." "Good. Because if you don't, I'll have you shot for cowardice." Patton smiled suddenly, the threat transforming into something that might have been a joke, though no one dared laugh. "Or the Germans will do it for me. Either way, there's only one direction today, Captain. Forward." With that, Patton strode back to his Jeep, his aides scrambling to keep up. Colonel Williams approached Morgan after Patton's departure, his face tight with controlled anger. "That was quite a guarantee you made, Captain. I hope you can deliver." "We'll find out soon enough, sir." Williams leaned closer. "Just remember, Morgan, when those panzers start cutting through your positions like butter, the responsibility for the lives lost will be on your head, not mine." Before Morgan could respond, the sound of distant artillery fire reached them. Both men turned toward the horizon where the German column was now clearly visible, still advancing steadily. "They're ranging their artillery," Morgan said. "The attack will begin soon." Williams nodded stiffly. "I'll be at the command post if you need me." As Williams walked away, Morgan couldn't help but reflect on how different the colonel was from Morgan's father and grandfather. The men in his family had always led from the front. His father had often spoken about the importance of seeing fear in the eyes of your men and helping them overcome it, something you couldn't do from a command post miles away. Morgan returned to his company, where his executive officer, Lieutenant Robert Texas Walker, was waiting with updates from the platoon leaders. "All positions report ready, Cap. The boys are nervous, but they'll hold." Morgan nodded. Texas was a ranch owner's son from El Paso, 10 years Morgan's junior, but with natural leadership ability that made him invaluable. Tell them to maintain radio discipline and wait for my command to fire. I want those panzers well inside our kill zone before we reveal our positions." As Morgan surveyed his men making final preparations, a jeep arrived from the rear area carrying an unexpected visitor. Major General Terry Allen, commander of the 1st Infantry Division, stepped out. "Captain Morgan," Allen greeted him, "thought I'd see how our tank killers are setting up." Morgan saluted. "General Allen, sir, we're as ready as we'll ever be." Allen was well respected among the troops for his willingness to share their dangers. Unlike many senior officers, he regularly visited frontline positions. "Your boys performed well at Kasserine, all things considered," Allen said, keeping his voice low. "Not many units made it out intact." "We lost half our vehicles and a third of our men, sir." Allen nodded grimly. "Better than most. The big red one got chewed up badly there. But today's different. Today we know what we're up against, and we've got Patton instead of Fredendall." Morgan gestured toward the German column. "They still have better tanks, better training, and more experience. And we have American ingenuity and stubbornness," Allen replied with a tight smile. "History is full of underdogs who changed the world, Captain. The Continental Army against the British Empire. The Union's farm boys against Southern aristocracy. Today it's your turn to make history." With those words of encouragement, Allen returned to his jeep. As the vehicle pulled away, the first German shells landed several hundred yards short of the American positions, sending plumes of sand and rock into the air. The Battle of Guettar was about to begin. Chapter 2. Brothers in Steel. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Morgan moved among his men, checking positions and offering quiet words of encouragement. Each M3 gun motor carriage represented not just a weapon system, but the lives of its 5-man crew. 17 vehicles, 85 men, all under his command. The responsibility weighed on him more heavily than the desert heat. Near the center of Alpha Company's position, Morgan found Sergeant Jack Wrench Miller supervising last-minute maintenance on his vehicle's transmission. At 50, Miller was the oldest man in the company, a grizzled veteran of the First World War who had lied about his age to re-enlist after Pearl Harbor. "How's she running, Wrench?" Morgan asked, crouching beside the half-track. Miller wiped grease from his hands with a rag that had once been white. "Like a dream, Cap, or at least like a bad dream instead of a nightmare." His weathered face broke into a grin that revealed a missing tooth. "She'll hold together long enough to send some Germans to hell. Don't you worry." Morgan nodded, appreciating Miller's confidence despite their equipment's limitations. The two men had formed an unlikely bond since North Africa, united by their Detroit backgrounds and mechanical expertise. "Your father would be proud seeing you here," Miller said suddenly, his voice dropping so only Morgan could hear. Morgan looked up, surprised. "You knew my father?" Miller nodded, his eyes distant. 103rd Infantry, 26th Division, the Yankee Division. I was there at Saint Mihiel when Thomas Morgan led his platoon across open ground to take that German machine gun nest. Bravest damn thing I ever saw." Morgan stared at the older man, processing this unexpected connection. "You never mentioned this before. Never seemed like the right time." Miller shrugged. Musser shrugged. "Besides, your old man wouldn't want me telling tales that might make you take foolish risks trying to live up to his legacy." "Did you stay in touch after the war?" Miller's face darkened. "For a time. I was at his funeral in '38. That's where I first saw you, though you wouldn't remember me. Just another old soldier paying respects." He paused, seeming to debate whether to continue. "He made me promise something that day. Said if you ever ended up in uniform, I should keep an eye on you. Took me 2 years to track you down after we both enlisted." The revelation stunned Morgan. For nearly a year, he'd served alongside Miller without knowing this connection existed. Before he could respond, a shout came from the observation post. "Movement at the front! Germans advancing!" The moment of personal connection shattered, and as Morgan switched instantly back to his role as commander. "Get your crew ready, Sergeant. The shooting gallery's about to open." As Morgan hurried toward the observation post, he passed by the M3 crewed by Staff Sergeant William Doc Thompson. Unlike most tank destroyer crews, Thompson's team consisted entirely of Negro soldiers from the newly integrated unit. The military's grudging steps toward integration had begun only after manpower shortages made segregation increasingly impractical. But prejudice remained entrenched. Thompson, a former medical student from Boston, looked up from where he was carefully adjusting the sight mechanism on a 75-millimeter gun. "We're ready, Captain," he said with quiet confidence that belied the extra scrutiny his crew faced daily. "Calibrated for 800 yards with armor-piercing rounds." Morgan nodded. "Good hunting, Doc. Remember what we discussed about targeting their drive sprockets if you can't penetrate the frontal armor. Thompson gave a slight smile. Aim for the tracks, watch them squirm like bugs on their backs. We remember, sir. Morgan continued his rounds, stopping next at the position manned by his youngest crew, led by Corporal Frank "Kid" O'Malley. At 19, O'Malley was barely old enough to shave, let alone lead men in combat. But Kasserine had promoted many soldiers beyond their years through the brutal attrition of battle. "How you holding up, kid?" Morgan asked. O'Malley's boyish face was etched with determination beneath his helmet. "Ready to show these Germans what Kansas farm boys can do, sir." Morgan noticed a slight tremor in the young man's hands, a natural reaction to the impending battle. "Remember your training. Let them get close, aim for the sides or rear when possible, and always keep moving after you fire." "Yes, sir," O'Malley replied, straightening his posture. "My pa always said, a moving target gathers no lead." Morgan smiled despite the gravity of the moment. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was, sir." O'Malley's expression flickered with emotion. "Died at Belleau Wood. I was just a baby." Another connection to the previous war, Morgan thought. So many sons following their father's footsteps into battle, generation after generation. He squeezed O'Malley's shoulder. "Make him proud today, Corporal." At the observation post, Lieutenant James Harvard Peterson was meticulously documenting the German advance through his field glasses. The former history professor had been a reservist called to active duty after Pearl Harbor, his academic mind proving surprisingly adept at intelligence work. "They've changed formation," Peterson reported as Morgan joined him, "breaking into 3 distinct groups. Looks like they're planning to hit us from multiple angles rather than a frontal assault." Morgan studied the approaching enemy through his own binoculars. Classic Guettarian doctrine. He wrote about it in Achtung Panzer before the war. Create breakthroughs at multiple points, then exploit the confusion. Peterson gave Morgan an impressed look. "You've read Guettarian?" "Know your enemy," Morgan replied simply. "The Germans telegraphed everything they planned to do in their military journals during the 30s. Nobody bothered to listen." As Morgan watched, the German formation continued to evolve. Tanks and infantry moving with the precision that had made the Wehrmacht the most feared fighting force in the world. The 10th Panzer Division had fought across Poland, France, and Russia before being transferred to Tunisia. They were veterans in every sense of the word, with years of combat experience against the Americans' months. "Their commander is good," Morgan observed, "using the terrain for cover, keeping his units mutually supporting." Peterson nodded. "Intelligence believes they're commanded by Colonel Kurt Wagner, Afrika Korps veteran, recipient of the Knight's Cross. He was Rommel's protege before being transferred to the 10th Panzer." Morgan was about to respond when the radio operator called him over. "Sir, we're picking up German transmissions. Lieutenant Gonzalez is translating." Morgan moved to where Technical Sergeant Rafael Gonzalez, a language professor in civilian life, was hunched over the radio with headphones pressed to his ears, scribbling notes. "What are they saying, Lieutenant?" Gonzalez looked up, his expression grave. "They're more organized than we thought, sir. They're coordinating with their artillery for rolling barrage patterns, and they know our positions, at least approximately." Morgan processed this information. "Someone's been talking, or they have better reconnaissance than we realized. How much time before they're in range?" 20 minutes, maybe less." Morgan made a quick decision. "Radio all platoons. We're adjusting positions. Move every vehicle 50 yards from their current location, either left or right. If they've plotted our positions, we need to make their intelligence obsolete." As his order was relayed, Morgan gathered his platoon leaders for a final briefing. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the desert landscape. Soon the German tanks would be silhouetted against the setting sun, a momentary advantage for the American gunners if they timed their attacks correctly. The officers huddled around a hastily drawn map in the sand. Besides Lieutenant Walker and Lieutenant Peterson, there was Lieutenant Michael Romano leading 1st Platoon, Lieutenant William Carter commanding 2nd Platoon, and Lieutenant James Cooper with 3rd Platoon. Each man bore the weight of responsibility for 20 men and their lives. "They're coming in 3 prongs, Morgan explained, drawing lines in the sand. 1st Platoon will engage the northern group, 2nd takes the center, 3rd handles the southern approach. Hold fire until they're within 800 yards. 1 shot, 1 kill is the goal. We don't have ammunition to waste." The officers nodded, their faces grim with determination. "What about artillery support, sir?" Lieutenant Romano asked. Limited, Morgan admitted. The 7th Field Artillery is backing us, but they're also supporting the entire divisional front. Don't count on them for anything more than occasional harassment fire. As the officers returned to their platoons, Morgan took a moment alone to gather his thoughts. The setting sun bathed the desert in golden light, creating an almost peaceful scene that belied the violence to come. He thought of his wife Margaret and their daughters back in Detroit, now working in the factories he had once supervised. Margaret would be finishing her shift at the tank plant, perhaps working on the very vehicles that would replace those lost today. The image of his family strengthened his resolve. This wasn't just about military objectives or strategic positions on a map. This was about protecting a way of life, ensuring that his daughters would grow up in a world free from fascism and tyranny. Morgan was pulled from his thoughts by the arrival of a motorcycle messenger, dust-covered and breathless. "Captain Morgan, message from Colonel Williams, sir." Morgan took the sealed envelope, breaking it open to read the typewritten orders inside. "Withdraw to secondary positions immediately. Intelligence confirms enemy strength at battalion level with artillery support. Primary positions deemed untenable." Morgan read the message twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in his pocket without comment. "Do you have a reply for the colonel, sir?" the messenger asked. "Tell him message received," Morgan said evenly. As the messenger departed, Lieutenant Walker approached. "New orders, Cap?" Morgan's jaw tightened. "Nothing that changes our mission, Texas." Walker studied his commander's face. "Williams wants us to pull back, doesn't he?" "The colonel is concerned about our positions," Walker snorted. "The colonel is concerned about his career. If we pull back now, we lose the high ground and our fields of fire." Morgan nodded. "That's why we're staying put. Patton's orders supersede Williams. We hold until relieved or ordered to advance." The decision made, Morgan returned to the observation post where Private Wilson was monitoring the radio. "Sir, there's been a development. Reconnaissance reports a German prisoner captured by our forward patrols. Says he's from the 10th Panzer's maintenance unit." "Is he talking?" "Yes, sir. Says their attack today is just a feint. The main thrust will come tomorrow at dawn from the northeast." Morgan considered this information skeptically. Could be disinformation. The Germans aren't above sacrificing a man to feed us false intelligence. "There's more, sir," Wilson continued. "He claims Colonel Wagner personally addressed their officers this morning. Said today would be the day they'd finish what they started at Kasserine and drive the Americans back into the sea." Morgan's expression hardened. The reference to Kasserine was a deliberate provocation, a reminder of American failure and German triumph. Whether the intelligence was true or false, the psychological message was clear. The Germans expected another easy victory. "Thank you, Private. Keep monitoring all frequencies." As Morgan returned to his command half-track, he found Sergeant Miller waiting for him, an unlit cigarette dangling from his lips. "Got a light, Cap?" Miller asked casually. Morgan produced a weathered Zippo lighter, its surface engraved with the 1st Infantry Division insignia, and lit Miller's cigarette. "The men are ready," Miller said after taking a deep drag, "but they're worried about our chances against those panzers. Talk is, the German tanks outgun us, outmatch us." "They do," Morgan admitted, on paper. "But paper doesn't fight wars," Miller finished the thought. "Men do. And steel," Morgan added. "Steel forged in the right fire can cut through anything." Miller smiled slightly. "That sounds like something your father would say." Morgan was about to respond when the distinctive whistle of incoming artillery shells cut through the air. Moments later, explosions erupted across the landscape in front of their positions. "It's starting," Morgan said, all personal thoughts vanishing as he focused entirely on the battle ahead. "Get to your vehicle." As Miller hurried away, Morgan climbed into his command half-track. From his position, he could see all 3 platoons spread across the hillside, their gun barrels pointed toward the advancing enemy. The German artillery had fallen short of their adjusted positions, confirming that the enemy was working from outdated intelligence. Through his binoculars, Morgan could now clearly see the German tanks advancing through their own artillery's dust clouds, their crosses and tactical numbers visible on their turrets. The Panzer IVs moved with mechanical precision, their long-barreled 75mm guns searching for targets. Morgan keyed his radio. "All units, stand by. Remember your training. Wait for my command to open fire." The radio crackled with acknowledgments as Morgan continued to observe the enemy advance. The German formation was textbook perfect, tanks and infantry supporting each other, artillery providing covering fire. They advanced with the confidence of veterans who had never known defeat against American forces. Today, Morgan thought, that changes. The distance closed, 1,200 yards, 1,000 yards, 900 yards. Morgan waited until he could see the commander's cupolas on the lead tanks before giving the order. All units, fire at will. Repeat, fire at will. Across the hillside, the 75mm guns of Alpha Company roared to life. Chapter 3, Planning and Preparation. The night before the battle found Morgan alone in his command tent, poring over maps by the light of a kerosene lamp. The canvas walls created a small pocket of isolation amidst the bustling activity of the battalion command post. Outside, vehicles moved in carefully dimmed lights, carrying ammunition and supplies to forward positions. The soft murmur of men preparing for combat filtered through, punctuated by occasional laughter that sounded more nervous than genuine. On Morgan's makeshift desk, alongside maps and intelligence reports, lay a leather-bound journal he had discovered among the personal effects of Captain Thomas Reynolds, an armor officer killed at Kasserine Pass. Reynolds had meticulously documented his observations of German tank tactics and American vulnerabilities, his final entry written just hours before his death. "Their panzers target our commanders first," Reynolds had written. "They recognize our vehicles by the extra antennas in position and formation. Once leadership is disrupted, they exploit the confusion with rapid flanking movements." Morgan had been studying the journal for weeks, extracting lessons paid for in blood. Reynolds had been one of the few American officers who truly understood armored warfare, and his posthumous insights might be the key to avoiding another disaster. A shadow darkened the tent entrance. "Still at it, Cap?" Lieutenant Peterson stood in the opening, his normally scholarly appearance disheveled from a day spent crawling through desert terrain to map German positions. "Come in, Harvard." Morgan gestured to the folding chair across from his desk. "What did you find out there?" Peterson unfolded a hand-drawn map and placed it beside Morgan's official charts. "They're positioned exactly where we expected, along the high ground here and here." His finger traced the terrain features. "But their artillery is more concentrated than intelligence suggested, and I spotted at least two 88mm anti-tank guns dug into these positions." Morgan studied the markings. The German 88mm was the most feared weapon on the battlefield, capable of destroying any American tank at ranges exceeding 2 miles. A direct hit from an 88 was almost always fatal. "Good work. This gives us something to plan around." Peterson hesitated. "There's something else, sir. Our forward listening post intercepted German radio traffic about a high-ranking officer inspecting their positions today. The name Wagner was mentioned several times." Morgan looked up sharply. "Colonel Kurt Wagner, the Afrika Korps veteran?" "Yes, sir. Apparently, he's personally commanding this operation." Morgan leaned back, absorbing this information. Wagner's presence explained the precision of the German deployment and raised the stakes considerably. The colonel was known for aggressive tactics and had never lost a significant engagement against Allied forces. "Did they mention their timeline for attack?" 500 hours tomorrow, sir, just before dawn." Morgan checked his watch. "Less than 8 hours to prepare." "Thank you, Lieutenant. Get some rest if you can." After Peterson left, Morgan returned to his maps, now with a clearer picture of what they faced. He had anticipated an attack, but knowing Wagner's involvement changed his assessment. The German colonel wouldn't commit his forces without confidence in victory. Tomorrow wouldn't merely be a probing action. It would be an all-out assault designed to shatter American resistance in a single, overwhelming blow. Morgan stepped outside, needing fresh air to clear his thoughts. The desert night had turned cold, stars gleaming with impossible clarity in the black sky. Around him, the encampment had quieted, men catching what sleep they could before morning. He walked slowly through the positions, acknowledging sentries with silent nods. At the edge of camp, he found Sergeant Miller sitting alone on an ammunition crate, smoking and staring into the darkness toward the German lines. "Penny for your thoughts, Wrench," Morgan said, settling beside him. Miller offered his cigarette pack. "Just remembering another night before battle, Argonne Forest, 1918, sitting just like this, watching the horizon, knowing what morning would bring." Morgan took a cigarette. "Was it as quiet then?" "Quieter. No vehicles, no radios, just men waiting to die." Miller struck a match, its flare momentarily illuminating his weathered face. "The waiting's always the worst part." "You never told me how you knew my father," Morgan said after a moment of silence. Miller exhaled smoke slowly. "We were in the same replacement battalion. Fresh recruits sent to fill the gaps after Belleau Wood. Your old man was a college boy. I was a factory worker from Pittsburgh. Shouldn't have had anything in common, but we both knew machines, could strip down and reassemble a Lewis gun blindfolded." He tapped ash from his cigarette. "Tom Morgan was something special. natural leader. Men would follow him anywhere, and did. That last day, at Saint Mihiel, our company was pinned down by German machine guns. Your father organized a flanking maneuver, led it himself, took a bullet in the shoulder but kept going, saved the entire company. Morgan had heard versions of the story growing up, but never from someone who witnessed it firsthand. He never talked much about the war. None of us did, Miller replied. Some things you can't explain to people who weren't there. He looked directly at Morgan. Your father made me promise something before he died. Said if you ever ended up in a war, I should find you, watch over you. Not that you need watching over. Is that why you requested transfer to this unit after Torch? Miller nodded. Pulled every string I had, nearly got busted back to private for it. He flicked his cigarette into the sand. Tom would be proud of you, Richard. Not just because you're fighting, but because of how you lead. You've got his way with the men. The unexpected personal connection left Morgan momentarily speechless. Finally, he asked, do we have a chance tomorrow, Wrench? Honestly? Miller considered the question. Against better tanks, better training, and more experience? He smiled slightly. Hell yes, we do, because they're expecting Kasserine again. They think we'll break and run at the first sign of trouble, but they don't know what we learned from that beating, and they sure as hell don't know Captain Richard Morgan. The vote of confidence coming from a veteran like Miller meant more than Morgan could express. Instead, he clapped the older man on the shoulder and rose to continue his rounds. Near the medical station, Morgan found Staff Sergeant Thompson checking supplies by lantern light. The medic-turned-tank commander looked up as Morgan approached. Evening, Captain. Just making sure we have enough sulfa powder and morphine for tomorrow. Morgan nodded. How's your crew holding up, Doc? Thompson's expression remained professional, but Morgan detected the underlying tension. They'll do their duty, sir. I know they will. That's not what I asked. Thompson hesitated, then spoke more candidly. Some of the replacement crews still have reservations about serving alongside us. Nothing overt, just the usual looks and whispers. Morgan had noticed the subtle ostracism faced by Thompson's all-Negro crew, despite their proven combat record. Your crew has the best gun derby scores in the company, Sergeant. Anyone who can't see past color isn't paying attention to what matters. Thank you, sir. Thompson carefully repacked his medical kit. My father fought in the last war, too, with the 369th. The Harlem Hellfighters. French gave them the Croix de Guerre. America gave them segregated units and second-class citizenship when they came home. Things are changing, Morgan offered, though he knew the progress was painfully slow. Thompson's smile was without humor. Yes, sir, they are. One funeral at a time. He straightened, his professional demeanor returning. We'll be ready at 0400, Captain, and we'll hit what we aim at. I know you will, Doc. Get some rest. As Morgan continued his circuit of the positions, he passed the mess area where Corporal O'Malley sat with several other young soldiers, playing cards by flashlight. Unlike the older veterans who sought solitude before battle, these boys found comfort in each other's company. O'Malley jumped to attention when he noticed Morgan. Captain, sir, we were just... At ease, Corporal. I'm not here to break up your game. Morgan gestured for him to sit. How's your crew, kid? O'Malley's boyish face brightened. Ready to give Jerry hell, sir. Reynolds is a little nervous, his first time in combat and all, but Martinez and Kowalski have him straightened out. Morgan nodded. O'Malley's enthusiasm was infectious, his Kansas farm boy optimism undiminished by the realities of war. Your guns sighted improperly? Yes, sir. Zeroed at 800 yards just like you ordered. And we've got the new armor-piercing rounds. Martinez says they'll cut through a Panzer like a hot knife through butter. Morgan hoped the young loader was right. The recently delivered M72 AP ammunition was supposed to offer improved penetration against the Panzer IV's frontal armor, but they hadn't had an opportunity to test it in combat. Just remember, aim for the sides or rear when possible, and keep moving after you fire. Yes, sir. O'Malley's expression turned serious. Sir, can I ask you something? Go ahead. The fellows were talking. Is it true Colonel Williams wanted us to pull back? That you countermanded his order? News traveled fast in combat units. Morgan chose his words carefully. Colonel Williams was concerned about our exposed position. I made a tactical assessment that maintaining our current positions offered better fields of fire and observation. O'Malley nodded, but his eyes revealed he understood what remained unsaid. We won't let you down, sir. I know you won't, Corporal. Morgan's final stop was the ammunition distribution point, where Lieutenant Robert Walker was supervising the allocation of the precious M72 rounds. The Texan's tall frame was bent over a clipboard, checking inventory against projected needs. "How's our supply, Texas?" Morgan asked. Walker looked up, pushing back his helmet. 87 rounds per vehicle, Cap. Not as much as I'd like, but more than we had at Kasserine. Morgan did the quick calculation. Just over 1,400 rounds total for the company. It would have to be enough. Make sure each vehicle has at least 10 high explosive rounds in addition to the AP ammunition. We'll need them for the infantry support. Already done. Walker set aside his clipboard. Word is Wagner himself is leading the Krauts tomorrow. That's the intelligence. Walker spat into the sand. Good. About time we taught those master race boys a lesson they won't forget. Morgan studied his executive officer. At 32, Walker was the son of a wealthy Texas rancher, a man who could have secured a safe commission stateside but had insisted on combat duty. His hatred of the Germans was personal. His younger brother had been killed at Dieppe during the disastrous raid in 1942. "We're not just fighting Wagner tomorrow," Morgan said. "We're fighting the ghost of Kasserine. Every general, every newspaper, every soldier in this theater is watching to see if Americans can stand against German armor. Then let's give them a show they'll talk about 4 years." Walker's confidence was unshakable. "These boys are ready, Cap. They've learned the hard way what works and what doesn't." Morgan nodded. "Get some sleep, Lieutenant. Tomorrow starts early." Returning to his tent, Morgan found a message waiting from battalion headquarters. Colonel Williams wanted to see him immediately. Morgan sighed, suspecting another argument about their defensive positions. The battalion command post was a larger tent set back from the front lines, illuminated by electric lights powered by a humming generator. Inside, maps and communication equipment created the illusion of order amidst chaos. Colonel Frank Williams stood at the central table, surrounded by staff officers. "Captain Morgan, reporting as ordered, sir." Williams looked up, his narrow face tight with controlled irritation. "Captain, we've received updated intelligence on enemy strength and disposition. The situation is more serious than previously assessed." "In what way, sir?" Williams pointed to markings on his map. "Aerial reconnaissance confirms at least 50 panzers, supported by mechanized infantry and artillery. They'll hit your position then at dawn, and frankly, I don't see how your 17 half-tracks can possibly stop them." Morgan studied the map. The intelligence confirmed what Peterson had already told him, though the estimated tank count was higher. "We're in good defensive positions, Colonel. High ground, clear fields of fire, mutually supporting positions. Good positions won't matter if you're outnumbered 3-1 by superior tanks." Williams straightened, his tone shifting to one of formal command. "I'm ordering a tactical redeployment. Pull your company back to the secondary defensive line by way of 300 hours." The secondary line was 2 miles behind their current position, sacrificing both the high ground and their carefully prepared firing positions. It was textbook conventional wisdom, but Morgan was convinced it was the wrong move. "Sir, with respect, if we pull back, we lose our observation of the enemy approach and surrender the initiative. The terrain at our current position funnels their armor into killing zones we've already ranged. At the secondary line, they can deploy more widely and bring their numerical advantage to bear." Williams' face flushed. "Are you refusing an order, Captain?" "No, sir. I'm requesting permission to maintain our current position, in accordance with General Patton's directive to hold ground against all enemy action." The mention of Patton caused Williams to hesitate. The new Corps commander had made it abundantly clear that retreating officers would face severe consequences. "Patton doesn't understand the reality on the ground here," Williams said, lowering his voice. "He's making strategic decisions based on politics, not tactics." "Nevertheless, sir, those are his orders." Williams stared at Morgan for a long moment, then seemed to deflate slightly. "Very well, Captain. Maintain your position, but I want hourly status reports, and if the situation deteriorates, I expect immediate notification." "Yes, sir." As Morgan left the command post, he knew he was walking a dangerous line. Technically, he had won the argument, but he had also cemented Williams' resentment. If tomorrow went poorly, the colonel would ensure Morgan took the fall. The night had deepened during his absence, the camp quieter as men sought what rest they could before morning. Morgan made one final circuit of the perimeter, checking sentries and listening posts, before returning to his tent. Inside, he unfolded a blank sheet of paper and began to write by lamplight. "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this letter, then I have fallen in service to our country. Please know that my last thoughts were of you and our daughters. Morgan paused, pen hovering over the paper. The traditional, if you are reading this letter, was a ritual for many officers before major engagements. He had written similar letters before Torch and again before Kasserine. Each time he had torn them up afterward, thankful they hadn't been needed. He continued writing, pouring his heart onto the page, expressing the love and pride that daily military stoicism rarely allowed him to show. He wrote of his hopes for their daughters' futures in a world freed from fascism, of his confidence that Margaret would carry on with the strength she had always shown. When the letter was complete, Morgan sealed it in an envelope, addressed it, and placed it in his breast pocket beside the photograph of his family. Then he checked his pistol, a Colt M1911 that had been his father's service weapon in the previous war, and placed it beside his cot. Sleep came fitfully, broken by the sounds of the camp and the weight of responsibility. Morgan's dreams were fragmented, shifting between memories of Detroit's assembly lines, his father's funeral, and the chaos of Kasserine Pass. He awoke before his alarm, the luminous hands of his watch showing 0330. Outside, the desert night was still dark, stars fading as the first hint of dawn approached the eastern horizon. Morgan dressed quickly, strapping on his pistol belt and checking his equipment with practiced efficiency. The company command post was already active when he arrived, radio operators monitoring frequencies, runners preparing to carry messages to positions where radio silence was maintained. Lieutenant Peterson was marking the latest intelligence updates on the tactical map. "Morning, sir," Peterson greeted him. "Forward observation post report vehicle movement in the German lines. They're forming up for the attack." Morgan studied the map. "Any changes to their disposition?" "One significant update. They appear to be concentrating their armor for a thrust along the main road rather than spreading across the front. It's a more concentrated attack than we anticipated." Morgan considered this development. A concentrated thrust meant fewer avenues of attack to defend, but also a more powerful punch at the point of contact. "They're counting on breaking through quickly and exploiting the gap. Adjust our reserves accordingly. I want 2nd Platoon ready to reinforce wherever they hit hardest." As Peterson relayed the orders, Morgan stepped outside to observe the awakening camp. All around him, men were preparing for battle in their individual ways. Some ate heartily from mess kits, knowing it might be their last meal for hours or forever. Others checked and rechecked their weapons with focused intensity. A few wrote letters home or prayed quietly. Near the ammunition point, Chaplain Robert Davis was holding an impromptu service for a group of soldiers. Morgan paused at the edge of the gathering, listening as the chaplain's voice rose in the pre-dawn darkness. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." The familiar words of the 23rd Psalm washed over the assembled men, some with heads bowed, others staring straight ahead. Morgan wasn't a particularly religious man, but he respected the comfort faith provided to his soldiers. After the chaplain finished, Morgan approached him. "Thank you, Chaplain. The men appreciate your presence." Davis nodded, his weathered face solemn. "They faced death today, Captain. My place is with them. Stay with the aid station once the shooting starts. You'll be needed there." "I'll go where the Lord directs me," Davis replied simply, but added, "though that's usually where the wounded are thickest." Morgan smiled slightly at the gentle correction and moved on to where his command half-track waited. Lieutenant Walker was already there, checking the vehicle's radio. "Morning, Cap. Clear channel to all platoons and back to battalion." "Good. Any word from our forward observers?" Walker nodded. "Germans are definitely moving. First light in about 20 minutes. They'll likely attack just after dawn, with the sun at their backs." "As expected," Morgan checked his watch. "Time to get everyone in position. Pass the word. Final checks, then battle stations." As the company came fully alert, Morgan gathered his platoon leaders for a final briefing beside the tactical map. Each officer reported their unit ready, ammunition distributed, weapons checked, and men fed. "Remember, we hold these positions regardless of pressure," Morgan told them. "If they break through at any point, we don't retreat. We pivot and hit their flanks as they pass." Lieutenant Peterson has identified their most likely approaches. They'll use the rising sun to blind our gunners, so be prepared to engage by sound and movement until visibility improves. The officers nodded, their faces showing the focused tension of men about to enter combat. "One last thing," Morgan added. "The men at Kasserine didn't fail because of lack of courage or commitment. They failed because they were poorly led and positioned. That's not the case today. You know your grim, you know your enemy, and you have every advantage of terrain and preparation. Today, we show the world what American fighting men can do. As the officers dispersed to their units, Morgan climbed into his command vehicle. From his position on the hillside, he could see the entire valley spread before him, still shrouded in the last moments of night. Far to the east, the faintest lightening of the sky heralded the approaching dawn. Morgan keyed his radio microphone. All units, this is Steel 6, report status. One by one, his platoon leaders responded, confirming their readiness. The tension built with each acknowledgement. The company poised on the edge of combat like runners before the starting pistol. The eastern sky continued to brighten, revealing the distant dust cloud of the approaching German column. Morgan raised his binoculars, focusing on the lead vehicles now visible against the lightening horizon. The distinctive silhouettes of Panzer IV tanks were unmistakable, advancing in a wedge formation with infantry carriers following behind. Morgan lowered his binoculars and drew a deep breath. All the planning, all the preparation, all the lessons learned in blood at Kasserine Pass would be tested in the next few hours. His men were as ready as he could make them, positioned to maximize their advantages and minimize their vulnerabilities. The first shell whistled overhead, a German ranging shot that exploded harmlessly behind their position. More followed quickly, a barrage designed to soften their defenses before the armored assault. The distinctive crack of 88mm guns joined the symphony of destruction, shells landing with terrifying accuracy near their positions. Morgan keyed his radio one final time as the German tanks closed the distance. All units, hold fire until targets enter the kill zone. Wait for my command. Across the hillside, American gun crews tensed at their weapons, sighting mechanisms aligned on the approaching enemy. The morning sun broached the horizon, momentarily blinding as it reflected off sand and metal, just as the Germans had planned. Morgan waited until he could see the commander's cupolas on the lead tanks before giving the order that would begin the Battle of Guettar. All units, fire at will. Repeat, fire at will. Across the hillside, the 75mm guns of Alpha Company roared to life. The desert erupted in thunder and flame as Alpha Company's guns fired in unison. The morning air, still cool from the night, shuddered with concussion waves as 17 75mm shells streaked toward the advancing German formation. Morgan watched through his binoculars as the first volley found its marks. Two Panzer IVs staggered, one erupting in flames, the other grinding to a halt with its track shattered. Good shooting! Reload and adjust! Morgan called into his radio, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. All units continue firing. Priority targets are lead tanks. The German response was immediate and fierce. The panzers halted their advance, commanders quickly identifying the American positions despite the careful camouflage. Their long-barreled 75mm guns elevated and traversed, seeking targets among the rocky hillside. Incoming, someone shouted, the warning barely audible before German shells began impacting around Morgan's position. One landed 30 yards to his right, the explosion sending rock fragments pinging against his half-track's armor. First platoon, shift fire left. They're trying to flank around the dry riverbed, Morgan ordered, spotting a group of panzers attempting to move around their northern flank. Second platoon, maintain fire on the center group. Lieutenant Walker was beside him now, tracking targets with his own binoculars. They're splitting their force, Cap. 3 distinct groups now. Morgan nodded. Just as Peterson predicted, they're looking for a weak point. He keyed his microphone again. All units, remember your sectors. Do not chase targets outside your assigned area. The battle was fully joined now, the morning air filled with the sharp crack of tank guns, the deeper boom of artillery, and the constant rattle of machine gun fire as German infantry began deploying from their half-tracks. Through his binoculars, Morgan could see the German commander's tank, identifiable by its additional radio antennas, directing the assault from behind the front line. That's Wagner, Morgan muttered, keeping himself safely back while sending his men forward. Smart tactics, Walker commented. Lousy leadership. Morgan was about to respond when his radio crackled urgently. Steel 6, this is Anvil 3. We're taking heavy fire from hold-down positions at our 10 o'clock. Request permission to displace. It was Lieutenant Cooper's voice, commanding 3rd Platoon on the southern flank. Morgan checked his tactical map. 3rd Platoon was covering the approach along a secondary road where the Germans appeared to be concentrating unexpected firepower. Anvil 3, maintain position but adjust firing points. Use alternate positions as needed. Understood, Steel 6, adjusting now. Morgan turned to Walker. Get on the horn to battalion. Tell them the main German thrust is coming along the southern approach. We need artillery support. As Walker moved to the radio, Morgan continued tracking the battle through his binoculars. The initial exchange had gone better than expected, with at least 4 German tanks disabled or destroyed. But the panzers were adapting quickly, using terrain features for cover and coordinating their fire more effectively. For every German tank hit, an American M3 was receiving damage in return. First blood to us. Miller's voice came over the radio, his tone grimly satisfied. Knocked out 2 of the bastards, but they got Johnson's vehicle. Crew bailed out, 2 wounded. Roger that, Morgan replied. Keep hitting them. The sun had risen fully now, bathing the battlefield in harsh light that made target identification easier for both sides. Morgan could see German infantry advancing in short rushes, using whatever cover they could find. They were veteran troops, their movements disciplined and coordinated. Captain, Peterson called from the observation post. Enemy infantry deploying heavy machine guns at grid coordinate Echo 5. They'll have clear fields of fire on our forward positions in minutes. Morgan made a quick decision. Walker, direct 2nd Platoon to shift 2 vehicles to counter those machine guns. High explosive rounds on the infantry positions. As Walker relayed the orders, Morgan's radio came alive with a call that chilled his blood. Steel 6, this is Anvil 1. Enemy armor breaking through on the northern flank. At least 10 panzers with infantry support. Morgan swung his binoculars north, where Lieutenant Romano's 1st Platoon was engaged in a fierce firefight. The German tanks had found a blind spot in their defenses and were exploiting it ruthlessly, pouring through a narrow ravine that provided cover from direct fire. All reserve units shift north to support 1st Platoon, Morgan ordered. Texas, get up there and coordinate the defense. I'll handle things here. Walker nodded, grabbing his helmet and sidearm. On my way, Cap. As his executive officer sprinted toward a waiting jeep, Morgan reassessed the battlefield. The German attack was more coordinated than he'd anticipated, applying pressure at multiple points to identify and exploit weaknesses. It was textbook blitzkrieg tactics, but executed with a precision that spoke to Wagner's experience. The radio crackled again. Steel 6, Anvil 2, enemy armor approaching main road intersection. Range 800 yards in closing, engaging now. Morgan watched his 2nd Platoon, commanded by Lieutenant Carter, open fire on the central German thrust. Their shells kicked up dust and debris around the advancing panzers, but the German tanks kept coming, returning fire with deadly accuracy. Direct hit on Vehicle 2-3. Carter's voice was tense but controlled. Crew status unknown. Morgan felt the familiar knot in his stomach that came with knowing men under his command were dying while he watched from a distance. But there was no time for emotion, and now the battle's outcome hung in the balance, and his decisions in the next few minutes would determine whether Alpha Company held or broke. Steel 6 to all units, Morgan broadcast. Adjust to Phase 2 defensive positions. Fall back to the secondary firing lines by teams. Leapfrog movements, maintain fire coverage at all times. The Phase 2 positions were 50 to 100 yards behind their initial fighting positions, prepared the previous day as fallback points. The controlled withdrawal would give his gunners better angles on the advancing Germans while making the enemy believe they were gaining ground. As his units acknowledged the order, Morgan spotted Corporal O'Malley's M3 engaging a Panzer IV at dangerously close range. The young commander was displaying either remarkable courage or foolhardy inexperience, holding position while tanks on either side of him began the ordered withdrawal. "Kid, fall back now!" Morgan called directly to O'Malley's vehicle. The M3 fired once more, scoring a direct hit on the Panzer's turret that caused the German tank to lurch to a stop, smoke pouring from its hatches. Only then did O'Malley's vehicle begin backing down the slope. Morgan allowed himself a moment of pride at the young corporal's gunnery before returning to the broader tactical situation. The battlefield had transformed into a chaotic panorama of moving vehicles, explosions, and dust clouds that made coordination increasingly difficult. Steel 6, this is Anvil 3, southern sector becoming untenable. Enemy flanking our positions with infantry. Request immediate support. Steel 6 to Anvil 3, hold as long as possible. Artillery support is incoming. Even as Morgan said the words, he wondered if they were true. Battalion had promised artillery fire, but so far no shells had fallen on the German positions. Either the fire missions were being redirected to more critical sectors, or communication had broken down somewhere along the line. Morgan grabbed the radio handset. Steel 6 to Hammer Actual. Urgent request for fire mission. Grid coordinates Foxtrot 8 through Hotel 4. Enemy armor and infantry in the open. Over. The radio crackled with static before a response came through. Hammer Actual to Steel 6. All tubes currently engaged supporting Eagle Sector. Will redirect when available. Over. Morgan swore under his breath. Eagle Sector was Colonel Williams's designation for the secondary defensive line, the one he had wanted Morgan to fall back to before the battle. The colonel was using their precious artillery to prepare for a retreat that Morgan had no intention of making. Steel 6 to Hammer Actual. We are heavily engaged with enemy armor. Without artillery support, we risk being overrun. Request immediate fire mission. Over. Negative. Steel 6, hold position. Support will be provided when available. Hammer Actual out. Morgan slammed the handset down in frustration. Williams was deliberately withholding support, either to force a retreat or to ensure Morgan's position became untenable, vindicating the colonel's earlier assessment. Sir, Peterson called from his observation post. New development. German armor on the northern flank is shifting east. They appear to be attempting to encircle our position. Morgan studied the situation through his binoculars. The Germans were indeed executing a classic pincer movement, with forces from both flanks beginning to curve around Alpha Company's position. If they completed the maneuver, Morgan's entire company would be cut off from the rest of the American forces. How long before they link up behind us, Morgan asked. Peterson calculated quickly. At current speed, 30 minutes, maybe less if they accelerate their advance. Morgan made a rapid series of decisions. Radio all platoons, fall back to Phase 3 positions immediately. Priority is maintaining an escape corridor to the east. As his orders were relayed, Morgan heard the distinctive sound of aircraft engines. Looking up, he spotted a flight of German Stuka dive bombers approaching from the north, their characteristic cranked wings silhouetted against the morning sky. Air attack incoming, he shouted. All units disperse and find cover. The first Stuka peeled off, its siren wailing as it dove toward the American positions. Bombs fell away from its wings, walking across the hillside in a series of devastating explosions. An M3 that failed to move quickly enough disappeared in a cloud of dust and smoke. Morgan ducked into his half-track as machine gun fire from the aircraft strafed his position, bullets pinging off the vehicle's armor and kicking up dirt around it. The Stukas made 3 passes, targeting the most visible American vehicles before banking away to the west. When the air attack ended, Morgan emerged to a transformed battlefield. Smoke rose from burning vehicles across their position, both American and German. The air assault had disrupted both sides, but the Germans were recovering more quickly, their tanks resuming their advance with renewed vigor. Casualty report, Morgan demanded over the radio. The responses painted a grim picture. 3 more M3s destroyed, several others damaged. 9 men confirmed dead, at least a dozen wounded. Alpha Company was down to 11 operational vehicles, and their ammunition was running dangerously low. Sir, we need to fall back, Peterson urged, his academic detachment giving way to pragmatic concern. The Germans have us outgunned and will soon have us surrounded. Morgan knew Peterson was right from a purely tactical perspective, but falling back now would mean another American defeat, another victory for the Germans to celebrate. The psychological impact would be devastating, reinforcing the belief that American forces couldn't stand against German armor. No, Morgan said firmly. We hold here. Radio Lieutenant Walker. Tell him to consolidate all northern units and prepare for a counterattack on the German right flank. A counterattack? Peterson looked stunned. Sir, with respect, we barely have enough operational vehicles to maintain a defensive posture, which is exactly why they won't expect us to attack, Morgan replied. We hit them hard where they think they've already won, create confusion in their ranks. It's our only chance to disrupt their encirclement. As Peterson reluctantly relayed the orders, Morgan received a new report that compounded their problems. Steel 6, this is Anvil 2. We're critically low on ammunition, average 15 rounds per vehicle remaining. 15 rounds meant perhaps 5 minutes of sustained combat before their guns fell silent. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Just then, Morgan spotted a dust cloud approaching from the rear area. A convoy of 3 supply trucks was racing toward their position, bouncing wildly over the rough terrain as they tried to reach Alpha Company before the German encirclement closed. Supply convoy incoming, Morgan announced over the radio. All units, provide covering fire to get those trucks through. It was a desperate gamble. The trucks would be exposed to German fire as they approached, but without ammunition resupply, the battle was already lost. Morgan directed his own half-track to move to a position where it could cover the convoy's final approach. The Germans spotted the incoming trucks and immediately shifted fire to intercept them. Shells began landing around the vehicles, forcing them to swerve erratically. One truck took a direct hit, erupting into a fireball that illuminated the desert landscape. The other two pressed on, drivers hunched over their steering wheels as they raced towards salvation. "Cover those trucks," Morgan shouted into his radio. "All available guns. Suppress the enemy." Alpha Company's remaining vehicles opened fire in unison, targeting the German tanks that threatened the convoy. The sudden concentration of American fire caught the Germans by surprise, forcing them to shift focus back to the immediate threat. Under this protective barrage, the two surviving trucks reached the American lines. They skidded to stops in a cloud of dust behind the ridge, immediately swarmed by crews desperate for ammunition. "Get those supplies distributed immediately," Morgan ordered. "Priority to forward units." As the ammunition was unloaded, Morgan received his first piece of good news of the day. "Steel 6, this is Anvil 1. Enemy armor on northern flank taking fire from their rear. Sounds like our artillery has finally found the range." Morgan raised his binoculars to look north. Through the dust and smoke, he could see German tanks shifting position, some turning to face a new threat behind them. American artillery had finally arrived, falling among the German formations with devastating effect. "Battalion must have redirected the fire mission," Peterson observed. Morgan nodded, though he suspected a different explanation. The timing was too coincidental with the arrival of the supply trucks. Someone with authority had seen their predicament and intervened directly. Perhaps Patton himself. "All units, press the advantage," Morgan ordered. "Walker, execute the counterattack now." On the northern flank, Lieutenant Walker had assembled a strike force of 4 M3s. At Morgan's command, they surged forward from concealed positions, catching the disoriented German tanks from an unexpected angle. Their shells slammed into the vulnerable side armor of the Panzers, transforming 3 German tanks into burning wrecks within minutes. The sudden reversal threw the German advance into confusion. Tanks that had been confidently pressing forward were now frantically trying to identify threats from multiple directions. The perfect coordination that had characterized their attack was breaking down. Morgan seized the moment. "All units, advance to phase 2 positions. Push them back." Across the line, American vehicles began moving forward, reclaiming ground they had yielded earlier. The German forces, caught between advancing Americans and continuing artillery fire, began a tactical withdrawal to regroup. As the morning battle reached its crescendo, Morgan received a radio call from an unexpected source. "Steel 6, this is Eagle 1. What's your situation?" "Over." It was Colonel Williams himself, his voice tense with barely contained anger. Morgan took grim satisfaction in delivering his report. "Eagle 1, this is Steel 6. Enemy attack repulsed on all fronts. We are maintaining our positions and counterattacking where possible. Ammunition situation improved thanks to the resupply convoy." "Over." There was a long pause before Williams responded. "Understood, Steel 6. Be advised, German reinforcements observed moving toward your position from the southwest. Estimated arrival in 2 hours. Suggest you consider tactical withdrawal while you have the opportunity." "Over." "Negative, Eagle 1. We have the enemy off balance. Withdrawing now would surrender the initiative. Request continued artillery support to exploit our advantage." "Over." Another pause, longer this time. "Artillery support approved for 1 hour maximum. Make it count, Steel 6. Eagle 1 out." Morgan set down the handset, knowing he had just won a significant victory in the ongoing Battle of Wills with his battalion commander. But the larger fight was far from over. The Germans had been repulsed, not defeated. They would regroup, adapt, and attack again. Likely with the reinforcements Williams had mentioned. "All platoon leaders report status," Morgan called over the radio. The reports confirmed what he already suspected. They had hurt the Germans badly, destroying or disabling at least 15 tanks and numerous support vehicles. But their own losses were severe. Only 9 M3s remained fully operational, with 2 more damaged, but still capable of firing from stationary positions. "What now, sir?" Peterson asked as they studied the tactical map, updated with their current positions and best estimates of German strength. "Now we prepare for the next round," Morgan replied. "They'll be back, and they'll have learned from this engagement." As if to emphasize his point, a series of explosions erupted along their front as German artillery began a systematic bombardment of their positions. The morning battle had ended, but both sides knew it was merely the first act in what promised to be a much longer drama. Morgan looked at his watch. It was only 0930. The longest day of his life was just beginning. Chapter 5, Valley of Death. The midday sun beat down mercilessly on the battlefield, its heat amplified by the fire still burning in disabled vehicles. Morgan wiped sweat from his forehead as he surveyed the changed landscape through his binoculars. What had been pristine desert that morning was now a scarred wasteland of impact craters, burned-out tanks, and scattered equipment. The morning's fierce fighting had given way to an uneasy lull. The Germans had pulled back beyond effective range, regrouping and tending to their wounded. American forces were doing the same, using the respite to repair damaged vehicles, redistribute ammunition, and evacuate casualties. "Water ration, sir," Private Wilson approached, offering a canteen. Morgan took it gratefully, rationing small sips despite his parched throat. Water, like ammunition, had become a precious resource. The supply trucks that had braved German fire to reach them had brought both, but with no guarantee of further resupply, conservation was essential. "What's the latest from the observation posts?" Morgan asked. "Lieutenant Peterson reports German vehicles moving behind their lines. Looks like they're bringing up reinforcements, just like Colonel Williams warned." Morgan nodded. The morning battle had bloodied the Germans, but Wagner was too experienced a commander to retreat after a single setback. He would adjust his tactics, strengthen his forces, and attack again, likely before the day was out. "Any word from Lieutenant Walker?" "Still coordinating repairs on the northern flank, sir. Says he can get 3 more M3s operational within the hour if the maintenance crews can find enough spare parts." Morgan had sent Walker to supervise the recovery efforts, knowing the Texans' mechanical background made him ideal for the task. Every operational vehicle they could add to their depleted ranks would be crucial for the battle to come. "Tell him to prioritize mobility over firepower if he has to choose. We need vehicles that can move even if their main guns aren't fully operational." As Wilson departed to relay the message, Morgan made his way to the aid station established behind the ridge. There, Sergeant Thompson and the battalion medics were treating the wounded from the morning's engagement. The scene was grim but organized. Men with less severe injuries sat or lay in rows on the ground, their wounds bandaged, waiting for evacuation. The more serious cases were inside the medical tent, where doctors worked feverishly to stabilize them before transport. Thompson looked up from dressing a private's arm wound as Morgan approached. His once immaculate uniform was now stained with blood and dirt, his face lined with fatigue beneath his helmet. "Captain," Thompson acknowledged, his voice hoarse from shouting instructions above the battle's noise. "If you're looking for a casualty count, we've got 11 KIA, 27 wounded, 8 of those critical." Morgan absorbed the numbers grimly. Nearly half his company was now combat ineffective. "How many of the wounded can return to duty today?" "Maybe 10, sir, and that's being optimistic. Mostly minor shrapnel wounds and concussions." Morgan nodded. "Do what you can for them. Battalion says they'll send ambulances forward once the route is secure." Thompson finished bandaging his patient and moved closer to Morgan, lowering his voice. "Sir, we're running low on plasma and morphine. If the fighting gets as intense as this morning..." He left the sentence unfinished, but Morgan understood the implication. More casualties would mean hard choices about who received treatment and who didn't. "I'll see what we can do about getting more medical supplies forward," Morgan promised, though he knew it would be difficult. The same German forces that threatened their front were also interdicting their supply lines to the rear. As Morgan turned to leave, Thompson spoke again. "My vehicle's still operational, sir. Once I've stabilized these men, I can return to it." Morgan studied the medic's exhausted face. "Your skills are needed here more than behind a gun, Sergeant." "With respect, sir, every gun will be needed before this day is over," Thompson replied with quiet determination. "I didn't leave medical school to sit in the rear while other men fight." Morgan recognized the resolve in Thompson's eyes. Despite the barriers of rank and race that separated them in the segregated army, they shared the common bond of responsibility for the men under their command. "Very well, Sergeant, but finish your work here first." "That's an order." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." Moving on, Morgan found Corporal O'Malley helping to organize ammunition distribution from the supply trucks. The young Kansan had distinguished himself during the morning fighting, his crew accounting for 2 confirmed Panzer kills. "Corporal," Morgan greeted him, "good work this morning." O'Malley straightened, his face smudged with dust and gunpowder, but his eyes bright with the energy of youth. "Thank you, sir. My boys are ready for round 2 whenever the Germans want to try again." Morgan appreciated the enthusiasm, though he suspected it masked the fear and exhaustion that all of them felt. How's your ammunition situation? 42 rounds of AP, sir, and 16 high explosive. We're in better shape than most. Make sure it gets distributed evenly among the operational vehicles, Morgan instructed. I don't want any crew running dry while others still have shells to spare. O'Malley nodded. Already on it, sir. Sergeant Miller's been organizing everything, making sure each crew has what they need. Morgan wasn't surprised. Miller's experience made him invaluable in situations like this, where proper preparation could mean the difference between life and death. He found the veteran NCO supervising repairs on a damaged M3, his weathered hands black with grease as he helped mechanics replace a damaged track assembly. How's it going, Wrench? Morgan asked, crouching beside the half-track. Miller wiped his hands on a rag, leaving them only marginally cleaner. She'll run again, Cap, but I wouldn't take her dancing. Suspension shot to hell, and the traverse mechanism on the main gun is sticking. Can you fix it? Already am. Miller gestured to the parts and tools spread around the vehicle. Won't be factory new, but she'll shoot and she'll move. That's what counts now. Morgan nodded, trusting the sergeant's assessment. What about the other damaged vehicles? Miller's expression turned grimly pragmatic. We've cannibalized 2 that were beyond repair to fix 3 others. Should have 5 operational within the hour, plus the 7 that survived the morning mostly intact. 12 vehicles out of their original 17. Not ideal, but better than Morgan had dared hope after the ferocity of the morning's engagement. The Germans will attack again soon, Morgan said quietly, ensuring only Miller could hear. Probably in the next hour or 2, once their reinforcements are in position. Miller nodded, his eyes scanning the distant ridgeline where German forces were regrouping. They'll come harder this time. Wagner won't make the same mistakes twice. No, he won't, Morgan agreed, which means we need to show him some new ones. The veteran NCO looked at him curiously. What are you thinking, Cap? Morgan outlined his plan quickly, keeping his voice low. As he spoke, Miller's expression shifted from skepticism to grudging approval. It's risky, the sergeant said when Morgan finished. If it works, we might just pull this off. If it doesn't, we're no worse off than we are now, Morgan completed the thought. We're outnumbered and outgunned either way. Miller nodded slowly. Your father would have liked this plan. He always said sometimes you have to be crazy to stay sane in war. Then let's be crazy, Morgan replied with a tight smile. Get this vehicle operational as quickly as you can, then meet me at the command post. I want you there when I brief the officers. Returning to his command half-track, Morgan found Lieutenant Peterson waiting with updated intelligence. The academic-turned-officer had shed his earlier hesitation, his analytical mind now fully focused on the tactical problems at hand. Sir, our forward observers report significant enemy movement behind their main line. They're definitely preparing for another attack. Show me, Morgan instructed, joining Peterson at the map board. Peterson pointed to marked positions across their front. They've brought up at least 20 fresh tanks, probably more hidden behind this ridgeline. Their infantry is remounting in half-tracks, suggesting they're planning a fast mechanized assault rather than the combined arms approach that they tried this morning. Morgan studied the map, noting how the German forces were concentrating more heavily on the southern approach. They're going to try to punch through here, he said, indicating the area where 3rd Platoon had struggled that morning. Then roll up our flank from the south. That's my assessment as well, sir, Peterson agreed. They probably assume that sector is weakened after this morning's fighting. And they're right, Morgan acknowledged. The southern platoon had suffered the heaviest losses, now down to just 2 operational vehicles. We could shift resources to reinforce that sector, Peterson suggested, which is exactly what they expect us to do, Morgan replied. And once we've weakened our center to reinforce the south, they'll hit us with everything they have right down the middle. Peterson studied the map again. So what's our counter? We give them what they want, Morgan said, his voice calm but determined. We make the southern flank look even weaker than it is. Pull back our remaining vehicles there, make it obvious. Let them commit to the breakthrough. And then we hit them from both sides with everything we've got, a classic ambush. Peterson looked skeptical. Sir, with respect, we're talking about veteran German tank commanders. They'll be alert for ambushes. Not if they believe they have already won, Morgan replied. Not if they think we're on the verge of breaking. Before Peterson could respond, a radio operator called from the communications tent. Captain Morgan, urgent message from battalion. Morgan took the offered handset. Steel 6 here. Colonel Williams' voice came through clearly, his tone terse. Steel 6, intelligence reports major German reinforcements moving to your sector. At least company strength, possibly more. Aerial reconnaissance confirms heavy armor, including possible Tiger tanks. Morgan's stomach tightened at the mention of Tigers. The German heavy tanks were nearly invulnerable to their 75mm guns, especially from the front. Understood, sir. We're preparing defensive positions now. Negative Steel 6, new orders from Division. You are to conduct an orderly withdrawal to the Echo Line effective immediately. Artillery will provide covering fire for your disengagement. The Echo Line was miles behind their current position, surrendering all the ground they had defended so fiercely that morning. It was the retreat Williams had been pushing for since the previous day. Sir, with respect, withdrawal now would expose the entire left flank of the division. We can hold our current positions. Williams' voice hardened. This is not a discussion, Captain. Division has assessed the situation and determined that your position is untenable against the incoming German force. You will withdraw as ordered. Morgan weighed his options quickly. Direct disobedience of an order in combat was a court-martial offense. But retreat now, after they had successfully blunted the first German assault, would not only surrender tactical advantage, but devastate morale. Sir, request permission to execute a delayed withdrawal. We've prepared defensive positions that can slow the German advance significantly. Let us engage them here first, then fall back in phases. There was a pause as Williams considered the compromise. Very well, Captain. You have 2 hours to conduct your delaying action. Then I expect your company at the Echo Line. Not 1 minute later. Is that clear? Perfectly clear, sir. Steel 6 out. Morgan returned the handset to the radio operator, his expression revealing nothing of the anger he felt. 2 hours might be enough time to bloody the Germans again, but it would mean abandoning their carefully prepared positions just when they had the enemy figured out. New orders? Peterson asked, having overheard Morgan's side of the conversation. We've got 2 hours to make the Germans regret coming back for a second round, Morgan replied. Then we're ordered to fall back to the Echo Line. Peterson nodded, understanding both the explicit order and Morgan's implied determination to make those 2 hours count. I'll inform the platoon leaders. Tell them to gather here in 15 minutes for a briefing. We're adjusting the plan. As Peterson left to relay the message, Morgan returned to studying the map. 2 hours wasn't much time, but it would have to be enough. The key would be convincing the Germans that they were facing a disorganized withdrawal rather than a coordinated defense. If Wagner committed his forces to a rapid advance, believing the Americans were retreating, they might overextend themselves enough to create an opportunity. Morgan was still refining his plan when the platoon leaders arrived for the briefing. Lieutenant Walker had returned from the northern sector, his uniform covered in dust and grease from helping with repairs. Lieutenant Cooper, commanding what remained of 3rd Platoon, looked exhausted but determined. Lieutenant Romano of 1st Platoon and Lieutenant Carter of 2nd completed the group, along with Sergeant Miller and Lieutenant Peterson. Gentlemen, Morgans began, we have new orders from battalion. We are to conduct a delaying action against the expected German attack, then withdraw to the Echo Line within 2 hours. The officers exchanged glances, their disappointment evident despite their professional demeanor. That said, we're going to make these next 2 hours the worst of Colonel Wagner's career. Morgan continued, his voice hardening with resolve. Here's how we're going to do it. He outlined his modified plan quickly but thoroughly. Instead of the ambush he had initially conceived, they would execute a fighting withdrawal, but with a twist. Each platoon would retreat in stages, creating the appearance of a disorganized pullback that would entice the Germans to advance rapidly. But at predetermined points, American vehicles would halt and establish hasty firing positions, catching the pursuing Germans in a gauntlet of coordinated fire. The key is timing, Morgan emphasized. Each phase has to look like we're running right up until the moment we stop and hit them. If they realize it's a trap, they'll advance more cautiously and reduce our effectiveness. What about air support, sir? Lieutenant Carter asked. The Stukas hurt us badly this morning. Battalion reports our own air cover is committed elsewhere, Morgan replied, sharing their frustration. The American air forces in Tunisia were spread thin, unable to provide the close support that ground troops desperately needed. We'll have to make do without it. The briefing continued with specific assignments for each platoon and coordination measures to ensure the complex withdrawal proceeded as planned. Despite the challenges, Morgan was impressed by the officers' focus and determination. They had been through hell that morning, but were ready to face it again if necessary. Any questions? Morgan asked as he concluded the briefing. Just one, sir. Lieutenant Cooper said, his voice steady despite the losses his platoon had suffered. What if Colonel Williams is right and the Germans have Tigers with them? It was the question Morgan had been dreading. The German Tiger I tank with its 88mm gun and thick armor was nearly impervious to their weapons from the front. If they have Tigers, we adjust our tactics, Morgan replied. Aim for the tracks, the rear armor, the vision ports. We don't have to destroy them, just disable them long enough to complete our mission. The answer seemed to satisfy Cooper, though Morgan suspected all of them knew the reality would be far more difficult than he made it sound. One last thing, Morgan added. Whatever happens out there today, remember that you're writing history. Before Kasserine, the Germans thought American soldiers were soft, untested, easy to break. This morning we showed them different. This afternoon we'll make sure they never forget it. The officers nodded, their faces reflecting both the weight of responsibility and the pride of proving themselves against the vaunted German army. Dismissed, return to your units and prepare for action. As the platoon leaders dispersed, Morgan turned to Lieutenant Peterson. What's our latest intelligence on the German positions? Forward observers report increased activity behind their lines. Tanks forming up in assembly areas, infantry remounting vehicles. All signs point to an imminent attack. Estimated time? Peterson consulted his notebook. Based on their current rate of preparation within the hour. Morgan nodded. Just enough time to get our own preparations complete. Coordinate with the artillery liaison. I want pre-plotted fire missions on all likely German assault roads. Already done, sir. Lieutenant Bradford has registered concentration points along all the main approaches. Morgan felt a surge of appreciation for Peterson's thoroughness. The academic's attention to detail had proven invaluable throughout the campaign. Very good. Now, get some rest if you can. The next 2 hours will make this morning look like a warm-up. As Peterson moved away, Morgan allowed himself a moment of private reflection. The morning's battle had been costly, but they had stood their ground against the best the Wehrmacht could throw at them. Now they faced an even tougher test, with depleted resources and the added complication of a mandated withdrawal. He thought about his father and grandfather, who had faced similar challenges in their own wars. What would they have done in his position? The answer came clearly, exactly what he was doing now. Fight with everything available, use every advantage, never surrender the initiative even when retreating. Morgan was pulled from his thoughts by a shout from the observation post. Movement at the front! German armor advancing! The respite was over. The second phase of the Battle of Guettar was about to begin. Morgan moved quickly to his command half-track, climbing into the observer's position as his driver started the engine. Around him, the remaining vehicles of Alpha Company were preparing for action, their crews loading weapons and checking equipment with the efficiency of men who knew their lives depended on doing everything right. Through his binoculars, Morgan could see the German armor advancing across the desert floor, maintaining perfect formation despite the rough terrain. Leading elements consisted of Panzer IVs, their long-barreled 75mm guns scanning for targets. Behind them came Panzer IIIs and armored personnel carriers filled with infantry. And there, in the center of their formation, the distinctive squared turrets of Tiger armored tanks, two of them moving with ponderous confidence amidst their lighter counterparts. The massive machines represented the pinnacle of German armor technology, their 88mm guns capable of destroying any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2 miles. All units, Steel 6, Morgan broadcast over the radio. Enemy armor advancing in force. Identified 2 Tiger tanks in their central formation. Commence Phase 1 of the delaying action. Across the American line, engines roared to life as M3 half-tracks began pulling back from their forward positions. The movement was coordinated to appear disorganized, vehicles leaving at slightly different times and moving at varying speeds, creating the impression of a hasty retreat. The German response was immediate and exactly as Morgan had predicted. Sensing weakness, they accelerated their advance, tanks spreading out to maximize the effect of their firepower. Infantry carriers moved up to exploit gaps in the American line, their commanders believing they were witnessing the beginning of a full American withdrawal. They're taking the bait, Lieutenant Walker reported from his position with 1st Platoon. Lead elements increasing speed. Hold your fire until they cross the first phase line, Morgan instructed. Let them commit fully to the pursuit. The first phase line was a wadi, or dry stream bed, that ran perpendicular to the German advance. Morgan had selected it as the initial ambush point because it offered covered positions for his gunners while forcing the German tanks to slow as they navigated the uneven terrain. The German advance continued, tanks now moving at top speed across the open desert, commanders standing in their cupolas to better direct their vehicles. They were eager, confident, smelling blood in the water as the Americans appeared to flee before them. Steel 6, Anvil 1, Lieutenant Romano's voice came over the radio. Enemy lead elements approaching phase line 1, ready to engage. Hold, Morgan commanded. Watching through his binoculars as the German formation closed the distance. Wait until their main body is committed to the crossing. The minutes stretched with excruciating slowness as Morgan waited for the perfect moment. The German lead tanks had already begun crossing the wadi, their commanders focused on maintaining momentum in the pursuit. Behind them, the main body of the attack force was just beginning to reach the depression, tanks and infantry carriers bunching slightly as they navigated the obstacle. Now Morgan ordered, all units, engage. Across the American line, M3 half-tracks that had appeared to be retreating suddenly halted, their crews swinging their 75mm guns toward the German formation. The coordinated volley caught the German tanks in vulnerable positions, many of them at angles that exposed their weaker side armor. The effect was devastating. 6 German tanks erupted in flames within the first minute, their ammunition cooking off in spectacular secondary explosions. Infantry carriers, caught in the open without the protection of accompanying tanks, were shredded by high explosive rounds. The German advance faltered, momentum broken as commanders tried to understand what was happening. Tanks that had been charging forward moments before now halted, their turrets traversing frantically to identify the sources of fire. Phase 2, execute, Morgan ordered, knowing they had only moments before the Germans recovered from their initial shock. American vehicles that had halted to fire now resumed their withdrawal, moving rapidly to predetermined secondary positions. This second movement further confused the Germans, who couldn't determine whether they were facing a coordinated defense or elements of a retreat. The Tiger tanks, initially held in reserve, now moved forward to spearhead the renewed German advance. Their massive 88mm guns began systematically targeting American positions, the high-velocity shells capable of penetrating any armor the Americans possessed. All units, be advised, Tiger tanks are engaging. Do not, repeat, do not attempt to engage them from the front. Target tracks and rear armor only. Morgan watched as the Tigers methodically advanced, seemingly impervious to the occasional hits they received from American guns. Their armor was so thick that standard American armor-piercing rounds simply bounced off the frontal plates. Steel 6, Anvil 2, Lieutenant Carter's voice was tense. Tigers are breaking through our sector. Request artillery support. Morgan keyed his microphone. Anvil 2, fall back to phase line 2. Artillery is being directed now. He switched channels to contact the artillery liaison. Hammer control, Steel 6. Fire mission, concentration, Baker 3. Enemy armor in the open. Fire for effect. Steel 6, hammer control. Fire mission accepted. Rounds inbound in 30 seconds. Morgan kept his binoculars fixed on the advancing Tigers, watching as they inexorably pushed forward despite the American resistance. Their 88mm guns fired with methodical precision, each shot finding an American vehicle or position with devastating effect. All units, be advised, artillery incoming. Take cover. Moments later, the whistle of incoming shells filled the air, followed by explosions that walked across the German formation. The artillery, pre-registered on likely avenues of approach, landed with surprising accuracy, throwing earth and debris across German tanks and infantry alike. The barrage temporarily halted the German advance, but Morgan knew it wouldn't last. The Tigers, though momentarily obscured by dust and smoke, would push forward again as soon as the shelling lifted. Execute Phase 3, Morgan ordered. I repeat, execute Phase 3. This was the most critical and dangerous part of his plan. Rather than continuing the withdrawal, select vehicles from each platoon would move laterally, positioning themselves to engage the Tigers from the flanks as they advanced through the dust cloud created by the artillery barrage. It was a desperate gambit, risking valuable assets on a maneuver that might not work. But if successful, it offered their best chance of neutralizing the German heavy tanks before they could devastate the American forces. Morgan watched anxiously as 4 M3s broke from their withdrawal routes, cutting across the battlefield toward positions that would give them clear shots at the Tigers' more vulnerable side armor. The vehicles moved with surprising speed, their crews understanding the importance of reaching their new positions before the dust settled. Steel 6, Anvil 3. Sergeant Miller's voice came through the radio, his tone grimly determined. In position and ready to engage. All ambush units, hold fire until the Tigers clear the dust cloud, Morgan instructed. Aim for the junction between the turret and hull, or the tracks. Make every shot count. The artillery barrage lifted, leaving a billowing cloud of dust and smoke that temporarily obscured the battlefield. For long moments, nothing moved, the entire scene frozen in an eerie stillness that belied the tension building on both sides. Then, through the thinning dust, the massive silhouettes of the Tigers reappeared, continuing their advance with the mechanical inevitability of moving fortresses. They were separated now from their supporting infantry and lighter tanks, having pushed ahead in their eagerness to break the American line. Targets acquired, Miller reported. Range 700 yards and closing. Fire when ready, Morgan ordered, knowing everything depended on these next few moments. The four M3s fired almost simultaneously, their 75mm guns delivering armor-piercing rounds at nearly point-blank range into the sides of the advancing Tigers. The sound of the impacts echoed across the battlefield, metal shrieking against metal as the rounds struck their targets. One Tiger lurched to a halt, its left track shattered by a direct hit. The other continued forward momentarily before a second volley struck its turret ring, jamming the mechanism and leaving its gun pointing uselessly off target. Direct hits on both targets, Miller reported, his voice tight with controlled excitement. One immobilized, one with disabled turret. Morgan allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before reality reasserted itself. The Tigers were damaged but not destroyed, and the rest of the German force was recovering from the artillery barrage, tanks and infantry reorganizing for another push. All units, continue with Phase 3 withdrawal. Repeat, continue withdrawal as planned. The damaged Tigers, though neutralized as immediate threats, had served their purpose in disrupting the American defensive line. German infantry, supported by lighter tanks, was now advancing rapidly through the gaps created by the heavy tank's penetration. Steel 6, Anvil 2, enemy infantry flanking our position from the south. Request permission to adjust withdrawal route. Permission granted, Anvil 2. All units remain flexible. Adjust routes as needed but maintain coordination. The battle was evolving rapidly, the carefully planned phases of Morgan's delaying action giving way to the chaos of mobile combat. American vehicles continued their fighting withdrawal, engaging German forces where possible before falling back to new positions. Morgan checked his watch. 45 minutes had passed since the German attack began. According to Colonel Williams' orders, they had just over an hour left before they needed to complete their withdrawal to the Echo Line. Steel 6 to all units. Begin final phase of delaying action. I repeat, begin final phase. The final phase called for a more rapid withdrawal, with vehicles moving in bounds, each group covering the others as they pulled back. The goal was no longer to inflict maximum casualties, but to disengage as cleanly as possible, while maintaining enough resistance to keep the Germans cautious. As Morgan's half-track began its own withdrawal, he kept his binoculars focused on the battlefield behind them. The Germans were pressing forward with renewed determination, but their advance had lost the coordinated precision of their earlier attacks. The delaying action had achieved its primary objective, disrupting the enemy's momentum and buying time for the rest of the division to prepare its defenses. Steel 6, Anvil 1. Enemy armor pursuing rapidly along the main road. They're trying to cut off our withdrawal road. Morgan made a quick decision. Anvil 1, take up blocking positions at grid reference Delta 7. Hold them long enough for the rest of the company to clear the intersection, then fall back. Understood, Steel 6. Moving now. The battlefield had become a complex mosaic of advancing German forces and withdrawing American units, with pockets of intense fighting erupting wherever the two met. Through it all, Morgan worked to maintain an overarching control, directing units and coordinating their movements to prevent isolation or encirclement. Steel 6, hammer control. Be advised, artillery support will terminate in 10 minutes. All tubes being redirected to support Echo Line defense. Morgan acknowledged the message, knowing they would soon be without the crucial fire support that had helped check the German advance. All units be advised, artillery support ending soon. Accelerate withdrawal timeline. The tempo of the battle increased as American units pushed their vehicles to maximum speed, taking greater risks to clear the area before artillery support ended. German forces, sensing the change, pressed their pursuit more aggressively. Steel 6, Anvil 3, Vehicle 37 disabled by enemy fire. Crew abandoning, request support for extraction. Morgan located the stricken vehicle on his mental map. It was O'Malley's M3, hit while covering the withdrawal of other elements. Anvil 2, can you provide covering fire for Anvil 37's crew? Affirmative, Steel 6, engaging now. Morgan watched anxiously as Lieutenant Carter's vehicles laid down suppressive fire, allowing O'Malley and his crew to escape their burning half-track and make their way to a nearby American vehicle. The young corporal's earlier enthusiasm had been replaced by the grim determination of a soldier who had seen too much death in a single day. Steel 6, Anvil 37 crew recovered, continuing withdrawal. Relief flooded through Morgan. Despite everything, they hadn't lost a single crew during the withdrawal. Vehicles, yes, but not men. In the cruel mathematics of war, that counted as a victory. All units, rendezvous at Checkpoint Charlie before proceeding to Echo Line. We regroup there. Checkpoint. Charlie was a small oasis 2 miles behind their current position, the last easily defensible terrain before the Echo Line. Morgan intended to use it as a final rally point, ensuring all elements of his company were accounted for before completing their withdrawal. As the scattered elements of Alpha Company converged on the checkpoint, Morgan took stock of their situation. They had lost 3 more vehicles during the withdrawal, bringing their total strength down to just 9 operational M3s. Ammunition was critically low, and several crews were sharing vehicles due to losses. But they had accomplished their mission. The German advance had been delayed, their forces bloodied, their momentum broken. Whatever happened next at the Echo Line, Alpha Company had done its part. All units present and accounted for, sir, Lieutenant Walker reported as the last vehicle arrived at the checkpoint, though some are worse for wear than others. Morgan nodded, surveying the battered collection of vehicles and exhausted men that constituted his command. Good work, Texas. Organize them for the final movement to the Echo Line. We'll proceed in convoy formation. Yes, sir. Walker hesitated, then added, Sir, the men are wondering, will we be back in the line at Echo? It was a question Morgan had been asking himself. After the punishment Alpha Company had taken, the logical decision would be to pull them into reserve for rest and refit. But logic didn't always govern military decisions, especially not with commanders like Williams. I don't know, Lieutenant. That will be battalion's call. For now, let's focus on getting there in one piece. As Walker moved off to organize the convoy, Morgan took a moment to survey the battlefield they were leaving behind. In the distance, German vehicles were still advancing, more cautiously now, as they approached the abandoned American positions. The dust and smoke of combat hung over the desert landscape like a shroud, obscuring features and lending an apocalyptic quality to the scene. Here and there, burning vehicles marked the progress of the day's fighting, some German, some American, all testaments to the human cost of war. Morgan turned away from the vista, focusing instead on the task at hand. They had fought well, held as long as ordered, and were now withdrawing in good order. By any military standard, they had succeeded. So why did it feel like defeat? The answer came to him as he watched his men preparing for the final movement to the Echo Line. It wasn't about the ground they were giving up or the tactical advantages they were surrendering. It was about momentum, about psychology. They had bloodied the Germans twice today, proven they could stand against the best the Wehrmacht had to offer. Retreating now, regardless of the strategic justification, felt like conceding that those victories had been meaningless. But they hadn't been meaningless, Morgan reminded himself. Every German tank destroyed, every enemy soldier killed or wounded, every minute of delay imposed on Wagner's advance contributed to the broader battle. Wars weren't won in single engagements, but in the cumulative effect of thousands of such actions. Convoy ready to move, sir, Walker reported, breaking into Morgan's thoughts. Very good, Lieutenant. Let's get these men to Echo Line. As the battered vehicles of Alpha Company formed up for their final movement, Morgan took his place at the head of the column. Whatever awaited them at the Echo Line, whatever battles remained to be fought, he knew with absolute certainty that his men had already accomplished something remarkable today. They had faced the best the German army could throw at them, and they had not broken. Chapter 6, Turning Point. The Echo Line sprawled across the desert landscape, a hastily prepared network of defensive positions established well behind the forward battle area. As Alpha Company's vehicles approached, Morgan could see engineers still working to improve the fortifications, digging gun emplacements and laying minefields under the supervision of harried officers. Not exactly the Maginot Line, is it? Lieutenant Walker observed dryly as they passed a group of soldiers stringing barbed wire across an exposed sector. Morgan made no reply. his attention focused on locating their assigned position within the defensive scheme. Colonel Williams had radioed coordinates for Alpha Company, placing them on the extreme right flank of the line, a position that suggested they were being relegated to a supporting role rather than held in reserve as Morgan had hoped. The convoy halted at a collection of shallow depressions that had been designated as tank destroyer positions. The terrain offered some natural cover, enhanced by the hasty excavation work of engineering units, but lacked the commanding views and interlocking fields of fire they had established at their previous location. "Have the men dispersed the vehicles according to standard defensive doctrine," Morgan instructed Walker as they dismounted. "I'm going to find battalion headquarters and report our arrival." "Yes, sir." Walker hesitated, then added, "The men performed exceptionally today, sir, no matter what Williams says." Morgan nodded, appreciating the Texans' loyalty. "They did. Make sure they know it." The battalion command post had been established in a small grove of date palms that offered shade and concealment from aerial observation. As Morgan approached, he noticed increased activity around the CP, staff officers moving with greater urgency than usual, radio operators hunched over their sets. Something had changed in the 2 hours since Williams had ordered their withdrawal. Colonel Williams was standing over a map table when Morgan entered the command tent, his narrow face tense with concentration as he studied tactical overlays with his operations officer. "Captain Morgan reporting as ordered, sir. Alpha Company has arrived at the Echo Line and is establishing defensive positions at the assigned coordinates." Williams looked up, his expression unreadable. "Captain, I was beginning to wonder if you'd make it. Your last radio check indicated you were still engaged with enemy forces." "We completed our delaying action as directed, sir, disengaged by phases and withdrew in good order. 9 vehicles operational, remaining crews consolidated." Williams nodded, making a notation on his clipboard. "Casualties?" 11 KIA, 37 wounded total for the day's action. We evacuated all wounded to the battalion aid station." "Very well. Have your executive officer submit a complete after-action report by 1800 hours." Williams turned back to his map, a clear dismissal. Morgan didn't move. "Sir, may I ask about the current situation? We observed continued German activity as we withdrew." Williams glanced up, irritation flickering across his features before being replaced by a mask of professional detachment. "The situation is developing. Intelligence reports suggest the Germans are regrouping for a major push, likely timed for late afternoon or early evening." "Directly against the Echo Line, sir?" "That appears to be their intention, yes." Williams studied Morgan more carefully. "Your delaying action appears to have had some effect. They're moving more cautiously now, bringing up additional forces before committing to another major assault." It was as close to approval as Morgan was likely to get from the colonel. "Thank you, sir. What are Alpha Company's orders for the defense of the Echo Line?" Williams turned back to the map, indicating their position on the right flank. "Your remaining vehicles will provide anti-tank support for the 26th Infantry Regiment's defense of this sector. Major Reynolds is the senior officer there. Report to him for specific tasking." Morgan examined the defensive layout, noting how exposed their assigned sector was compared to the more heavily fortified central positions. "Sir, with respect, my men have been in continuous combat since dawn. Many are operating on their 3rd or 4th crew position due to casualties. A brief rotation into reserve would allow us to reorganize and—" "Denied, Captain," Williams cut him off sharply. "Every operational vehicle is needed on the line. The 26th has no organic anti-tank capability following their action at point 772 yesterday. Your company, diminished as it is, represents their only defense against German armor." Morgan wanted to argue further, but recognized the futility. Williams had made his decision, and no appeal to the men's exhaustion would change it. "Understood, sir. We'll report to Major Reynolds immediately." As Morgan turned to leave, Williams spoke again, his tone surprisingly less harsh. "Captain Morgan, your company's performance today was adequate. You accomplished your mission despite difficult circumstances. That will be reflected in my report to division." Coming from Williams, it was high praise indeed. Morgan acknowledged the compliment with a nod before exiting the command post. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the defensive positions as Morgan made his way back to where Alpha Company was establishing their new fighting positions. The men worked with mechanical efficiency, their movements slowed by exhaustion, but guided by the muscle memory of repeated drills and combat experience. He found Sergeant Miller supervising the distribution of the last of their ammunition among the 9 operational vehicles. his weathered face lined with fatigue beneath a fresh layer of dust. "How's it looking, Wrench?" Morgan asked. Miller straightened, wincing slightly as he stretched muscles stiffened by hours in a cramped fighting compartment. "Making do with what we've got, Cap. Average 23 rounds per vehicle, mostly armor-piercing, barely enough for a serious engagement." Morgan nodded grimly. Ammunition resupply had been promised at the Echo line, but like many such promises in combat, it had failed to materialize in the chaos of the larger battle. "Any word on our next move?" Miller asked, his voice low enough that only Morgan could hear. "We're staying in the line, right flank, supporting the 26th Infantry. No reserve rotation." Miller absorbed this information without visible reaction, though Morgan suspected the veteran sergeant was as disappointed as he was. "The boys won't like it, but they'll do their job." "I know they will. Have Lieutenant Walker organize a quick crew rotation for meals and rest. One vehicle at a time in 15 minutes each. I want everyone to get at least some hot food and a chance to stretch their legs before nightfall." "Will do, Cap." Miller hesitated, then added with a hint of his old humor, "At least the food might be hot here, unlike the sea rations we've been eating cold all day." "Small mercies, Sergeant." Morgan managed a tired smile. "While the men are eating, have the platoon leaders meet me at the command half-track. We need to coordinate with the infantry we're supporting." As Miller moved off to relay the orders, Morgan took a moment to survey their new position more thoroughly. The Echo line had been established along a low ridge that offered decent observation of the approaches from the direction of their previous position. Natural wadis and depressions provided some cover for defending forces, augmented by hasty entrenchments in sandbag gun positions. It wasn't ideal terrain for tank destroyers, lacking the elevated firing positions that allowed them to maximize the range of their guns, but it was defensible. With proper coordination between the infantry and their remaining vehicles, they could make any German attack costly. Morgan found Lieutenant Peterson updating their tactical maps with the new defensive positions, his academic precision undiminished by the day's combat. "What's your assessment, Harvard?" Morgan asked, crouching beside the intelligence officer. Peterson looked up from his work, pushing wire-rimmed glasses back up his dust-streaked face. "Defensible but challenging, sir. The terrain channelizes attacking forces through these approaches." He indicated 3 natural avenues on the map, which gives us predictable targeting zones. "But it also means they'll likely concentrate overwhelming force at their chosen point of penetration." Morgan nodded. It was a succinct and accurate analysis, typical of Peterson's clarity of thought. "And if they bring those Tigers forward again?" Peterson's expression turned grimmer. "Then we have a serious problem, sir. Our positions don't offer the flank shots we'd need to penetrate their armor. It would be a frontal engagement, and none of our weapons can reliably penetrate Tiger frontal armor." "Then we better hope they committed their Tigers to the northern sector," Morgan replied, though he suspected that hope was in vain. Wagner was too smart a commander to waste his most powerful assets where they weren't needed. By the time the platoon leaders gathered for their briefing, Morgan had completed his own reconnaissance of their sector and made contact with Major Reynolds of the 26th Infantry. The infantry commander had been grateful for the anti-tank support, positioning Morgan's vehicles to cover the most likely armor approaches, while his infantry established defensive positions in depth. "Here's our situation," that Morgan began, crouching beside a map drawn in the sand as his officers gathered around. "We're on the right flank of the Echo line, supporting the 26th Infantry Regiment. They've been in position since this morning, 2 battalions forward, 1 in reserve." He indicated the disposition of forces with sticks placed in the sand map. "Our 9 vehicles are distributed to cover these 3 likely armor approaches. 1st Platoon with Lieutenant Romano takes the northern sector. 2nd Platoon under Lieutenant Carter covers the center, and what remains of 3rd Platoon with Lieutenant Cooper handles the southern approach." The officers studied the simple but effective sand table, asking clarifying questions about fields of fire and support relationships with the infantry units they were backing. "What about ammunition resupply, sir?" Lieutenant Cooper asked, voicing the concern uppermost in all their minds. "Battalion promises it's coming," Morgan replied, not bothering to hide his skepticism. "In the meantime, we conserve what we have. No ranging shots, no engagement beyond 800 yards unless it's a priority target, and no wasting rounds on infantry when the 26th weapons can handle them." The officers nodded, understanding the necessity of ammunition discipline in their situation. "What's the estimated timeline for the next German attack?" Lieutenant Romano asked. "Intelligence suggests late afternoon or early evening, though that's just an educated guess." Wagner may wait until morning to give his forces time to regroup and resupply. Or he might push through the night to catch us tired and disorganized, Lieutenant Walker added grimly. Morgan nodded, which is why we need to establish a rest rotation immediately. 1/3 of all crews down at any given time, rotating every 4 hours. Lieutenant Walker will coordinate the schedule. The briefing continued with specific assignments and coordination measures, including radio frequencies for communication with the supporting infantry and artillery units. Throughout it all, Morgan was impressed by his officers' focus despite their obvious exhaustion. They had been through hell today, but were still functioning with professional competence. One last thing, Morgan said as he concluded the briefing. Whatever happens next, remember what you accomplished today. You stood against the best the German army could throw at you, and you didn't break. You made Wagner pay in blood for every yard of ground. That's something no one can take away from you, no matter what happens here. The officers straightened slightly at his words, pride momentarily overcoming fatigue. They dispersed to their assigned sectors, each carrying the responsibility of translating Morgan's general guidance into specific actions by their men. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Morgan completed a circuit of their positions, checking each vehicle and crew personally. The men were exhausted but determined, their earlier swagger replaced by the quiet competence of soldiers who had seen combat and survived. He found Corporal O'Malley with what remained of his crew, now assigned as gunner on Sergeant Thompson's vehicle after their own M3 had been destroyed in the withdrawal. The young Kansan's boyish face was streaked with dirt and dried blood from a minor shrapnel wound to his forehead, his uniform torn and filthy. But his hands moved with practiced efficiency as he cleaned the breech of the 75mm gun, preparing it for the next engagement. "How's it going, kid?" Morgan asked, crouching beside the half-track. O'Malley looked up, managing a tired smile. "Ready for round 3, sir. Just hoping the Germans give us a breather before they come visiting again." "They might at that," Morgan replied. "How are you holding up? That was a close call during the withdrawal." O'Malley's expression sobered. "Too close, sir. Martinez didn't make it. Caught a machine gun burst when we were abandoning the vehicle." He swallowed hard. He was right behind me. Should have been me instead. Morgan placed a hand on the young corporal's shoulder. "That's not how it works, O'Malley. Martinez was a good soldier. He did his job to the end, just like you're doing yours now." "Yes, sir," O'Malley's voice steadied. "We'll make them pay for Martinez. And Johnson and all the others." "Just make your shots count," Morgan advised. "Ammunition's too scarce for revenge firing." Moving on, Morgan found Sergeant Thompson checking the engine of his M3, his medical background evident in the methodical way he diagnosed a mechanical issue with the fuel line. "Problem, Doc?" Morgan asked. Thompson straightened, wiping his hands on an already filthy rag. "Nothing serious, sir. Fuel filters clogging with sand. Been happening all day. We're cleaning it every hour to keep her running." Morgan nodded. The half-tracks were workhorses, but vulnerable to the harsh desert conditions. Sand fouled engines, clogged filters, and worked its way into every moving part, causing gradual degradation of performance. "How's your crew holding up?" Morgan asked, noting the exhaustion evident in Thompson's usually composed features. "Tired but functional, sir. O'Malley's a good gunner, better than we had before. Silver lining to a bad situation, I suppose." Morgan understood the unspoken complexity in that statement. Thompson's all-Negro crew had been augmented by a white gunner, a mixing that would have been unthinkable in training, but was accepted without comment in the crucible of combat. "Keep them sharp, Sergeant. I have a feeling we haven't seen the last of Wagner today." "Yes, sir, we'll be ready." As Morgan completed his circuit and returned to the command half-track, the western sky was ablaze with the colors of sunset, the harsh desert light softening to gold and amber. In other circumstances, it might have been beautiful. Now it merely marked the passage of time, each minute bringing them closer to the next German assault. Lieutenant Peterson was waiting for him, a message form in his hand. "Sir, report from forward observation posts. German activity increasing along the front. Vehicle movement and infantry formations assembling approximately 3 miles from our position." Morgan studied the message, a cold certainty settling in his gut. "They're coming tonight. Wagner doesn't want to give us time to improve our defenses or bring up reinforcements." "That's my assessment as well, sir," Peterson agreed. "Estimated time to contact based on current movement rates, approximately 2 hours." 2 hours. Barely enough time for the men to complete one rotation of their rest schedule. Morgan made a quick decision. Cancel the rest rotation. Get everyone back to their vehicles and on full alert. And find out where that ammunition resupply is. We're going to need it." As Peterson moved to relay the orders, Morgan keyed his radio microphone. "Steel 6 to all Anvil units. Stand to alert positions. Enemy movement confirmed to our front. Estimated contact in 2 hours. Acknowledge." The platoon leaders responded in sequence, their voices reflecting the renewed tension that came with the prospect of further combat. They had hoped for a respite, a chance to recover from the day's fighting, but Wagner was giving them no such luxury. Morgan turned to his radio man. "Get me battalion." The connection was made quickly, and Colonel Williams came on the line personally, his voice tense. "Steel 6, this is Eagle 1. Report." "Eagle 1, Steel 6. Forward observers report the significant enemy movement to our front. All indications point to an attack within the next 2 hours. Request immediate ammunition resupply and artillery coordination." There was a brief pause before Williams responded. "Understood, Steel 6. Ammunition convoy en route to your position now. Should arrive within 30 minutes. Artillery is being coordinated through Division Fire Support Center." Anything else? Morgan was momentarily surprised by Williams' businesslike response, lacking the usual undertone of criticism or skepticism. "Negative, Eagle 1, we'll hold our position." "See that you do, Captain. The entire right flank depends on your sector. Eagle 1 out." As Morgan replaced the handset, he reflected on the subtle shift in Williams' tone. The colonel's earlier dismissiveness had been replaced by a grudging acknowledgement of Alpha Company's importance to the defense. Whether that represented a genuine change in Williams's assessment or merely the reality of their tactical situation was impossible to determine. The promised ammunition convoy arrived 20 minutes later. 6 trucks escorted by armored cars, their drivers pushing hard to reach the defensive positions before full darkness. Morgan supervised the distribution personally, ensuring each vehicle received a fair share of the precious rounds. 37 AP and 15 HE per vehicle, Morgan instructed as crates were unloaded and broken open, plus 2 rounds of smoke for emergency use only. The men worked with renewed energy, the prospect of adequate ammunition raising morale more effectively than any speech could have. By the time the last crate was emptied, each M3 was combat loaded and ready, their depleted ammunition stores replenished just in time for the coming fight. As darkness fell completely, the desert battlefield was transformed. The vast emptiness that had been visible by day was now a sea of blackness, broken only by the occasional flare or distant vehicle light. Sound traveled differently at night, carrying further across the still air, bringing the noises of German preparations to American ears with unnerving clarity. Morgan gathered his platoon leaders for a final briefing before the expected attack. "Night changes the equation," he told them, his voice low in the darkness of the command post. "They lose some of their advantages in precision and coordination. We lose some of our observation capability. It balances out, but introduces new variables. They'll likely use flares to illuminate our positions before attacking," Lieutenant Peterson added. "Standard German night attack doctrine." Morgan nodded. "When they do, we'll be silhouetted against the background. Have your gunners prepared to shift positions immediately after firing to avoid return fire. Use the darkness to your advantage." The officers acknowledged the guidance, adding their own observations about night fighting techniques based on previous experiences. Despite their exhaustion, they remained focused, professional, committed to the task ahead. "Questions?" Morgan asked as he concluded the briefing. There were none. Everything that needed to be said had been said. The officers dispersed to their platoons, leaving Morgan alone with Lieutenant Walker at the command half-track. "What do you think, Cap?" Walker asked quietly as they watched the men making final preparations. "Can we hold them again?" Morgan considered the question carefully. "If it's just another frontal assault like this morning, yeah, but Wagner's too smart for that. He'll have learned from his earlier attacks, adapted his approach. And if he brings those tigers forward, then we improvise," Morgan replied simply. "Find weak points, create opportunities, exploit any mistake they make." Walker nodded, accepting the response for what it was. Not boundless optimism, but the practical determination of a commander who had assessed the situation realistically and was prepared to deal with it as it developed. "I'll check the northern sector. Make sure Romano's men are properly positioned," Walker offered. "Good. I'll take the southern end with Cooper. Meet back here in 20 minutes. As Walker moved off into the darkness, Morgan took a moment alone to gather his thoughts. The day had been the most intense of his military career, a constant cycle of crisis, decision, and action that had tested him as a commander and as a man. Now, with another battle looming, he felt a strange calm settling over him, the clarity that came with accepting that some things were beyond his control. He would make the best decisions possible with the information available. He would lead by example, sharing his men's dangers and hardships. He would refuse to give in to fatigue or despair. Beyond that, the outcome would be determined by factors no single person could fully control. The complex interaction of courage and fear, skill and luck, determination and exhaustion that constituted the chaos of battle. Morgan checked his watch. Based on Peterson's estimate, they had less than an hour before the expected German attack. He started toward the southern sector to check Lieutenant Cooper's positions, his mind already gaming out the likely scenarios of the coming engagement. The turning point of the Battle of Guettar was approaching, though none of the Americans dug into their positions along the Echo line yet realized it. By dawn, they would either have broken the back of the German offensive or been overwhelmed by the superior force arrayed against them. As Morgan moved through the darkness, checking positions and encouraging his men, he felt the weight of that responsibility. But alongside it was a steely determination that had been forged through the day's combat. Whatever came next, Alpha Company would face it unflinching. They had proven themselves against the best the Wehrmacht could offer. They had learned from Kasserine's bitter lessons and applied those lessons successfully. They had demonstrated that American soldiers could stand toe-to-toe with the vaunted German army. Now they would prove they could do it again. The darkness wrapped around Morgan like a shroud as he crouched beside Sergeant Miller's M3, the desert night bringing a surprising chill after the scorching heat of day. Stars blazed overhead with impossible clarity, providing just enough illumination to make out the silhouettes of men and vehicles positioned along the Echo line. "I need volunteers," Morgan said quietly to the small group of officers and NCOs gathered around him. 6 men for a special mission, high risk but potentially decisive. The nature of the mission had been taking shape in Morgan's mind since the first reports of Tiger tanks accompanying the next German assault. Conventional tactics had proven largely ineffective against the heavily armored behemoths during the day's fighting. If they were to survive the coming battle, they needed a more aggressive approach. "What kind of mission, sir?" Lieutenant Walker asked, his Texas drawl more pronounced with fatigue. "Reconnaissance in force," Morgan replied, "behind German lines." A brief silence greeted his words as the men processed the implications. Behind enemy lines meant no support, no quick extraction if things went wrong, and almost certain death if captured. "I'll go," Sergeant Miller said without hesitation, his weathered face barely visible in the darkness. "Me too, sir," O'Malley added immediately, the young Kansan's voice firm despite the danger being proposed. Morgan had expected nothing less from either man. "Lieutenant Peterson, I need you as well. Your knowledge of German equipment and tactics is essential." The intelligence officer nodded. "Of course, sir." 3 more volunteers quickly stepped forward. Corporal Jackson from 2nd Platoon, renowned for his skill at silent movement. Private Reynolds, who had been a hunter in civilian life with exceptional night vision. And surprisingly, Sergeant Thompson, who had left his vehicle under his gunner's command to join the mission. 6 men as requested, Walker observed. "What exactly are we doing, Cap?" Morgan unfolded a hand-drawn map on the hood of the half-track, using a shielded flashlight to illuminate it briefly. "Intelligence reports the Germans are assembling their assault force approximately 2 miles from our current position. Their Tigers will spearhead the attack, likely moving up just before they launch their main effort." He traced a route on the map with his finger. "We're going to locate those Tigers now, before they move up. This wadi provides a concealed approach to their assembly area. Once there, we identify the exact position of the heavy tanks and, if possible, eliminate their commanders." "Eliminate?" Peterson questioned, the academic in him seeking precision. "Kill," Morgan clarified bluntly. "Tigers are formidable because of their armor and guns, but they're commanded by men. Remove the commanders, particularly their senior officers, and their effectiveness drops dramatically." The men nodded, understanding the brutal calculus. In tank warfare, decapitating the command structure could be as effective as destroying the vehicles themselves, especially for specialized units like Tiger companies that relied heavily on experienced leadership. "We'll need weapons," Miller said practically. "Rifles won't cut it against armored vehicles." Morgan nodded. "Each man carries his sidearm, fighting knife, and a satchel charge. We're not trying to destroy the tanks themselves, just disable them or eliminate their commanders. Silent weapons only unless absolutely necessary. The mention of satchel charges raised eyebrows. The explosive packages were powerful enough to damage a tank's tracks, engine compartment, or other vulnerable areas if placed correctly, but using them required getting dangerously close to the target. Timeline? Walker asked. We move out in 15 minutes. Based on observed German patterns, they're likely to launch their attack just before dawn. That gives us approximately 4 hours to complete the mission and return. Morgan surveyed the volunteers, giving each man a final chance to reconsider. None wavered. Lieutenant Walker, you're in command while I'm gone. If we're not back by a word, assume the mission failed and prepare for a full German assault, including operational Tigers. Walker nodded grimly. Understood, sir. We'll be ready. One last thing, Morgan added. No dog tags or identification. If we're captured, we're just a standard patrol that got lost. Nothing to suggest a special operation. The men removed their identification silently, handing the metal tags to Walker for safekeeping. The action drove home the dangerous nature of what they were about to attempt, transforming them from conventional soldiers into something closer to commandos. 20 minutes later, the small team slipped through the American lines, moving in single file down the dry stream bed that provided their concealed approach to the German positions. Morgan led with Miller close behind, then O'Malley, Thompson, Jackson, and Reynolds bringing up the rear. Peterson walked alongside Morgan, his knowledge of German equipment and language making him essential to the mission's success. They moved slowly, carefully, each footstep placed to minimize noise. The wadi deepened as they progressed, its sandy bottom occasionally giving way to smooth rock that required even more caution to navigate silently. Above them, the desert night remained clear and star-filled, providing just enough light to move by once their eyes had fully adjusted to the darkness. An hour into their journey, Morgan raised his hand, signaling a halt. Ahead, the faint glow of shielded lights marked the German assembly area. The men froze, crouching lower in the wadi as Morgan and Peterson crawled forward to observe. From their vantage point at the edge of the depression, they could see German vehicles arranged in a rough semicircle around a central command area. Tanks and half-tracks were being refueled and rearmed, mechanics working by lantern light to prepare them for the coming battle. Infantry rested nearby in small groups, some sleeping, others cleaning weapons or eating from mess kits. There, Peterson whispered, pointing to a cluster of larger vehicles set slightly apart from the others. Tigers, 4 of them. Morgan followed his gesture, identifying the massive silhouettes of the German heavy tanks. Even at rest, they projected lethal power, their long 88mm guns aimed skyward like accusing fingers pointed at the heavens. Crew activity? Morgan asked quietly. Peterson studied the scene through his binoculars. Minimal. Most appear to be resting. Maintenance crews working on 2 of them, probably final checks before the attack. Morgan continued his survey, noting the disposition of sentries and obstacles. The Germans were professional, their security arrangements thorough but not paranoid. Regular patrols circled the perimeter, and machine gun positions were established at key points. But there were gaps a small team might exploit. Command tent? Morgan asked. Peterson shifted his binoculars. There, near the center, staff cars parked outside, one with unit flags. Morgan spotted the tent, larger than the others, and illuminated from within, casting silhouettes of officers studying maps onto the canvas walls. If Wagner was personally commanding this attack, as seemed likely given its importance, he would be there, planning the final details of the assault. They retreated back to where the rest of the team waited, Morgan quickly outlining what they had observed. 4 Tigers, plus support vehicles and infantry. Command tent centrally located, sentries patrolling but not overlapping coverage. We have a potential approach through their southern perimeter. What's the plan, Cap? Miller asked. Morgan didn't hesitate. 2 objectives. Primary, place satchel charges on the Tigers, timed to detonate just before their planned attack. Secondary, reconnaissance of the command tent to identify senior officers and, if possible, gather intelligence on their attack plan. We split up? Thompson asked. Morgan nodded. 2 teams. Miller, O'Malley, and Jackson take the Tigers. Peterson, Thompson, Reynolds, and I will approach the command tent. Rendezvous back here in 40 minutes regardless of mission status. The men checked their weapons and explosives one final time. Each carried a Colt 1911 pistol with suppressor, a combat knife, and either satchel charges or smaller explosive packages depending on their assignment. They had removed or blackened anything that might reflect light or make noise. Remember, this is primarily reconnaissance, Morgan emphasized. We gather intelligence, set charges if possible, then extract cleanly. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. The information we bring back is as valuable as any damage we inflict. With hand signals, Morgan directed Miller's team toward the Tigers while leading his own group in a wide arc that would bring them up behind the command tent. They moved like shadows across the desert floor, utilizing every fold in the terrain, freezing whenever sentries passed nearby. The first challenge came as they approached the outer perimeter of the German encampment. A machine gun position guarded the most direct approach, two soldiers manning the weapon while a third dozed nearby. Morgan signaled a halt, studying the position for weaknesses. There was no way around it without adding significant time and risk to their approach. The decision was made in seconds. Morgan pointed to Reynolds and made a silent throat-cutting gesture, then indicated the dozing sentry. Reynolds nodded, understanding immediately. The former hunter moved forward alone, his body low to the ground, advancing with a patience and stealth born of years stalking deer in the forests of Michigan. The sleeping sentry never stirred as Reynolds reached him, one hand clamping over the German's mouth, while the other drove a blade up under the ribs and into the heart, a clean kill that produced barely a sound. One obstacle removed, but two alert sentries remained at the machine gun. Morgan signaled Thompson forward, pointing to the water canteen at the sergeant's belt, then gesturing toward a position 50 yards to their flank. Thompson understood, detaching his canteen and moving away from the group. Moments later, the distinct sound of water pouring onto sand came from the darkness, just loud enough to draw attention, but ambiguous enough to require investigation rather than immediate alarm. One of the machine gunners left his position, moving cautiously toward the sound with his rifle ready. The remaining sentry, now alone and more alert than before, scanned the darkness nervously. He never saw Peterson approaching from behind until the lieutenant's arm was around his throat, cutting off both air and sound until consciousness faded and the German slumped to the ground, unconscious but alive. Morgan quickly bound and gagged both incapacitated sentries, using their own belts and handkerchiefs to ensure they couldn't raise an alarm when they eventually recovered. The team converged again, continuing their approach toward the command tent with increased urgency. The missing sentries would be discovered during the next patrol rotation, giving them perhaps 20 minutes before their presence was detected. As they neared the center of the encampment, activity increased. Officers moved between vehicles and command areas. Messengers carried orders, and mechanics continued working on the tanks and vehicles that would spearhead the coming attack. The team was forced to move more slowly, utilizing the shadows cast by vehicles and supply crates for concealment. Morgan spotted the command tent 30 yards ahead, now with two sentries posted at its entrance. Inside, the silhouettes of several officers were visible against the canvas, gathered around what appeared to be a map table. One figure stood slightly apart from the others, his distinctive posture and the deference shown by those around him, marking him as the senior commander. Wagner, Peterson whispered, confirming Morgan's assessment. They couldn't get closer without risking detection. Morgan made a quick decision, signaling Reynolds to establish an observation position covering the tent entrance, while he, Peterson, and Thompson worked their way around to the rear of the structure. The back of the tent was less well guarded, with only a single sentry patrolling a circuit that took him past every 30 seconds. Timing their movement to his patrol pattern, the three men reached the canvas wall and pressed close to listen to the conversation inside. The officers were speaking German, their voices low but distinct. Peterson leaned forward, his ear almost touching the fabric as he translated in whispered fragments. Attack plans. Three-pronged assault. Tigers to lead the central thrust. Codename Operation Hammer. Timed for 0430 hours. Targeting the American right flank. Morgan absorbed the information, mentally updating his understanding of the German plan. They were indeed targeting Alpha Company's sector, using their heaviest assets to punch through what they perceived as the weakest point in the American line. The timing, just before dawn, matched their earlier estimate, but now was confirmed. As Peterson continued translating, a voice rose slightly inside the tent, its tone authoritative and precise. "Colonel Wagner," Peterson whispered, identifying the speaker. "He's giving final instructions to his tank commanders." Morgan strained to see through a small gap where the canvas met the ground. Inside, he could make out polished boots and the lower portion of a map table surrounded by officers. One pair of boots, adorned with the distinctive spurs some panzer officers still wore, as a tradition from the cavalry, paced as the voice continued issuing orders. They had confirmed Wagner's presence and the basic outline of the German attack plan. Now they needed to extract safely and relay this intelligence to the American line. Morgan was about to signal a withdrawal when the conversation inside shifted to something that froze him in place. "He's talking about the morning battle," Peterson translated, his voice barely audible. "Says the American tank destroyers fought with unexpected skill, wants to ensure they're eliminated first in the coming attack. Special recognition for any crew that confirms destruction of an American command vehicle." Wagner had recognized the threat Alpha Company posed and was specifically targeting them in the coming assault. The knowledge was valuable but concerning. If the Germans concentrated their heaviest assets against Morgan's depleted force, the outcome was all but predetermined. A sudden commotion from the direction of the tank park interrupted Morgan's thoughts. Shouts rose in the night, followed by the distinctive crack of a pistol shot. Miller's team had encountered trouble. Inside the tent, the conversation stopped abruptly. Orders were barked, boots moved quickly, and the officers began dispersing to investigate the disturbance. Morgan signaled an immediate withdrawal, leading Peterson and Thompson away from the tent as rapidly as stealth allowed. They retreated through the German encampment, now buzzing with increased activity as soldiers responded to the alarm. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, sweeping across the area where the shots had been heard. Morgan led his team away from the disturbance, circling back toward their extraction route, while hoping Miller's group would make it to the rendezvous point. They had almost reached the perimeter when a German patrol appeared directly in their path, 5 soldiers moving purposefully toward them. There was no time to hide, no alternative route available. Morgan drew a suppressed pistol, indicating for the others to do the same. They would have to eliminate this patrol quickly and silently to maintain any hope of escape. The Germans spotted them at almost the same moment, raising their rifles as shouts of alarm began forming on their lips. Morgan fired twice, dropping the lead soldier before he could cry out. Beside him, Peterson and Thompson engaged the others, their suppressed weapons making little more noise than sharp coughs in the night. 4 Germans fell in the initial exchange, but the 5th got off a short burst from his MP-40 before Thompson's bullet found him. The submachine gun's distinctive sound cut through the night, instantly drawing attention from nearby positions. "Run," Morgan ordered, abandoning stealth for speed. They sprinted toward the wadi, pursued by shouts and the increasing sound of German soldiers converging on their position. Flashlight beams swept the terrain behind them, occasionally illuminating their fleeing figures for split-second glimpses. Rifle fire erupted from multiple positions, bullets kicking up sand around them as they ran. Morgan felt the searing heat of a near miss along his arm, but kept moving, focused entirely on reaching the relative safety of the wadi. They plunged down the embankment into the dry stream bed, immediately turning to provide covering fire for each other. "Keep moving," Morgan ordered between breaths. "Head for the rendezvous point." They continued down the wadi at a jog, the sounds of pursuit gradually fading behind them. The Germans, uncertain of their number or objective, seemed hesitant to pursue too aggressively into the darkness, especially with the possibility of running into an American ambush. When they finally reached the rendezvous point, Miller and Jackson were waiting, their expressions grim in the faint starlight. "O'Malley?" Morgan asked immediately, noting the young corporal's absence. Miller shook his head. "They got him. We placed charges on 2 Tigers, but a maintenance crew spotted us at the 3rd. O'Malley provided covering fire so we could escape. Last I saw, they had him surrounded." The news hit Morgan like a physical blow. O'Malley was barely 20, a farm boy who had joined up after Pearl Harbor with the simple desire to serve his country. Now he was either dead or captured, his fate unknown. "Did he have anything that could identify the mission?" Morgan asked, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "No, sir," Miller replied. "No tags, no unit insignia, nothing in writing. They'll know he's American, but not what he was doing there specifically." Morgan nodded, allowing himself a moment of hope that the young corporal might survive as a prisoner. "Were the charges placed successfully?" "Yes, sir. 2 Tigers rigged to detonate at 0400 just when they'd be moving into position for their attack. Shaped charges against the engine compartments. Should disable them completely, might even cook off their ammunition if we're lucky." It was something at least. 2 of the 4 German heavy tanks would be eliminated before the battle began, improving their odds marginally. Combined with the intelligence they had gathered about the attack timing and focus, the mission had achieved its essential objectives, though at terrible cost. "We need to move," Thompson urged. "The Germans will widen their search once they realize we've escaped the immediate area." Morgan checked his watch. They had been gone just over 2 hours, leaving them adequate time to return to American lines before the German attack began, assuming they encountered no further obstacles. "Peterson, what else did you learn at the command tent?" Morgan asked as they began moving, wanting to ensure all intelligence was shared in case not all of them made it back. "The attack will come at 0430, three-pronged but with main effort focused on our sector," Peterson summarized. 4 Tigers were to lead the central thrust, with approximately 30 Panzer IVs and IIIs divided among the 3 attack groups. Infantry follows in half tracks to secure any breakthroughs. Artillery support? Significant. They've brought up additional batteries specifically for this assault, targeting our forward positions and command areas. They'll try to suppress our anti-tank guns in the initial barrage. Morgan absorbed this information, already formulating adjustments to their defensive plans. If they could get back in time to implement them, they might yet survive the coming onslaught. The return journey was slower than their approach, their energy sapped by the night's exertions and the tension of the infiltration. Every shadow seemed to hold potential danger, every sound a possible German patrol. Morgan pushed them as hard as he dared, knowing that each minute might be critical for preparing their defenses. They were within a mile of American lines when Reynolds, acting as point man, suddenly raised his hand in warning. The team froze, melting into the shadows of the wadi as voices became audible ahead. German voices. Morgan crept forward to join Reynolds, peering carefully over the edge of the depression. 30 yards ahead, a German patrol had established a position directly across their route back to American lines. Whether by coincidence or design, the enemy had blocked their most direct path home. "Size?" Morgan whispered. "Squad strength," Reynolds replied softly. "Machine gun in place covering the wadi. They know it's a likely exfiltration route." Morgan considered their options. They could attempt to bypass the position, adding significant time to their journey, or they could try to eliminate the obstacle directly. With O'Malley already lost and the critical intelligence they carried, he was reluctant to take additional risks. But time was equally precious. "We go around," he decided. "Wide berth to the south, then approach our lines from that direction." The detour added nearly 40 minutes to their journey, forcing them to move at maximum speed once they had cleared the German position. By the time they finally approached the American perimeter, the eastern sky was showing the first faint hints of pre-dawn lightning. "Halt! Who goes there?" An American sentry's challenge greeted them as they neared the forward positions. "Captain Morgan and reconnaissance team returning," Morgan replied, careful to keep his voice clear but not too loud. "Advance and be recognized." They approached slowly, hands visible, until the sentry confirmed their identities and allowed them through the lines. Lieutenant Walker was waiting for them at the command post, his expression shifting from tension to relief as Morgan appeared. "Thank God," Walker said, clasping Morgan's shoulder. "We were about to write you off." "Nearly had to," Morgan replied grimly. "Mission accomplished, but at a cost. O'Malley's been captured or killed." Walker's expression sobered immediately. "Damn, he was a good kid. The best. But we don't have time to mourn now. The German attack comes at 0430, less than an hour from now. Main effort focused directly on our sector, spearheaded by Tigers. 4 of them, according to intelligence," Walker confirmed. 2 now," Morgan corrected. "Miller's team placed charges set to detonate at 0400. Should take a pair of them out of the equation before the attack begins." Walker's eyebrows rose appreciatively. "That improves our odds. What else?" Morgan quickly shared the intelligence they had gathered, focusing on the 3-pronged attack plan and the German artillery preparations. As he spoke, the platoon leaders gathered around, absorbing the information and its implications for their defensive positions. "Recommendations?" Morgan asked, including all of them in the rapid planning process. These men had been fighting the Germans all day. Their insights were valuable. "Shift our positions," Lieutenant Romano suggested immediately. "If they have our current locations mapped for artillery, even a 50-yard adjustment could reduce casualties significantly." "Agreed," Morgan said. "All vehicles reposition immediately, but maintain coverage of the same basic sectors. Lieutenant Peterson, coordinate with the 26th Infantry to ensure they understand the German plan and can adjust accordingly." Peterson nodded, moving off to establish contact with the infantry command post. What about those remaining Tigers? Lieutenant Carter asked, voicing the concern uppermost in everyone's mind. We target their tracks and rear armor, just like before, Morgan replied. But we also try something new. Sergeant Miller, explain the technique you used at Kasserine. Miller stepped forward, his weathered face grave in the pre-dawn light. Turret lock. Tigers have a vulnerability when engaging targets at extreme depression or elevation. If you can get them to elevate their gun to maximum trying to hit something above them, the gun can stick, leaving them unable to traverse or depress quickly. How do we exploit that? Walker asked. Flares, Morgan explained, fired directly over their position when they're close enough to engage. Natural instinct is to elevate the gun to track the light source. When they do, we hit them from the side while their main gun is pointed uselessly at the skitama. It was a desperate tactic, but they were in a desperate situation. With their ammunition limited and their vehicles outnumbered, they needed every advantage, every trick, every edge they could find. Questions? Morgan asked, looking at each officer in turn. There were none. Then get to your positions. This will be the day's defining action, one way or another. Make it count. As the officers dispersed to implement the defensive adjustments, Morgan took a moment to check his watch. Bo 355, 5 minutes until Miller's charges detonated, 35 minutes until the expected German attack. Just enough time to reposition their vehicles and brief the crews on the revised tactics. Miller approached as Morgan was studying the latest intelligence map. Cap, there's something you should know. When we were placing the charges, I overheard German officers talking near the Tigers. One name came up several times, Dieter Wagner. Morgan looked up sharply. Wagner's son? Miller nodded. Sounded like he's a tank commander with the Tiger Company. If he's anything like his old man, he'll be leading from the front. The information added a new dimension to their understanding of the coming battle. If Wagner's son was commanding one of the Tiger platoons, it suggested the German colonel was personally invested in this attack beyond normal military objectives. It might explain the determination with which the Germans had pursued them throughout the day, and the concentration of force being brought to bear on their sector. Good to know, Morgan said. Keep it to yourself for now. No need to add that complication to the men's thinking. Miller agreed with a nod, then moved off to help prepare the remaining vehicles for combat. Morgan turned back to the map, making final adjustments to their defensive plan based on the night's intelligence. At precisely 0400, two massive explosions illuminated the pre-dawn darkness to their front. The ground trembled with the force of the detonations, followed seconds later by the distinctive secondary explosions of tank ammunition cooking off. Right on schedule, Walker observed, joining Morgan at the observation point. Miller's charges found their marks. Morgan nodded, watching through binoculars as flames rose from the German assembly area. The explosions would create confusion and delay in the German ranks, possibly disrupting the carefully timed coordination of their attack plan. Every minute gained was valuable for American preparations. Pass the word to all platoons, Morgan ordered. German attack imminent. Final positions, final checks. This is what we've been building toward all day. We hold here no matter what. Across the Echo line, the men of Alpha Company made their final preparations. Ammunition was checked one last time, gun sights adjusted, engines started briefly to ensure they would respond when needed. The harsh lessons of Kasserine Pass and the hard-won experience of the day's earlier battles had forged these men into a cohesive fighting force that understood both their capabilities and limitations. The eastern sky continued to lighten, the stars fading as the first hints of dawn approached. In the distance, movement became visible along the German lines as tanks and infantry formed up for the assault. The distinctive silhouettes of the two remaining Tigers stood out among the more numerous Panzer IVs and IIIs, their massive guns aimed toward the American positions like accusing fingers. At 0425, 5 minutes ahead of their expected schedule, the Germans opened fire. Artillery shells screamed overhead, impacting with devastating accuracy on positions that would have contained American vehicles had they not been repositioned based on Morgan's intelligence. The barrage walked across the Echo line, churning earth and filling the air with deadly fragments. Here they come, Walker said unnecessarily as German tanks began advancing through their own artillery's dust cloud, infantry following close behind in half-tracks. Morgan keyed his radio microphone. All units, hold fire until targets cross phase line able. I repeat, hold fire until phase line able. Phase line able was an imaginary line 800 yards from their position. representing the optimal engagement range for their 75 mm guns against the Panzer IVs that made up the bulk of the German armor. The Tigers could engage effectively from much greater range, but Morgan was counting on their confidence and momentum to bring them within range of the American trap. The German advance continued methodically, tanks moving in textbook formation with infantry support. Their artillery shifted to targets further behind the American line, isolating the forward defenses from reinforcement or retreat. It was classic German combined arms warfare, executed with the precision and confidence of troops who had perfected their craft across Europe and North Africa. "They're approaching phase line Able," Lieutenant Romano reported from the northern sector. "Request permission to engage leading elements." "Negative," Morgan responded. "Wait for my command. All units stand by." The tension mounted as the German tanks closed the distance, now clearly visible in the growing light of dawn. Infantry squads moved alongside the armor, ready to exploit any breakthroughs. The two Tigers held the center of the formation, their massive bulk dominating the battlefield both physically and psychologically. "Range 700 yards, Walker reported, tracking the lead tanks through his binoculars. "Execute flare plan," Morgan ordered. Across the American line, flare guns fired simultaneously, sending illumination rounds arcing high over the advancing German formation. As expected, several German tanks, including one of the Tigers, elevated their main guns to track what they perceived as possible aerial threats. "All units fire at will," Morgan commanded. The ridgeline erupted as Alpha Company's guns opened fire in unison, their shells streaking toward the momentarily distracted German tanks. The effect was devastating. 3 Panzer IVs were hit in the initial volley, 2 erupting in flames as armor-piercing rounds penetrated their thinner side armor. The Tiger that had elevated its gun to track the flares found itself in precisely the vulnerable position Miller had described. With its main armament pointed uselessly skyward, it was unable to traverse quickly to engage the real threats on its flanks. Multiple American shells struck its side armor and track assembly, not penetrating the thick steel, but immobilizing the massive vehicle and damaging its drive sprocket. The German advance faltered as commanders tried to identify and engage the American firing positions. Their careful formation began to break down as individual tank commanders reacted to the immediate threats they perceived, some advancing aggressively, while others sought cover or better firing positions. "They're splitting up," Peterson observed from the command post, "formations losing cohesion." This was exactly what Morgan had hoped for. A disorganized enemy was far easier to defeat in detail than one advancing in coordinated formations. "Focus fire on vehicles attempting to advance," Morgan ordered. "Isolate and eliminate them one by one." The battle devolved into a series of intense individual engagements as German tanks tried to locate and destroy the American positions, while M3s fired, repositioned, and fired again, never remaining stationary long enough to draw concentrated return fire. The remaining operational Tiger posed the greatest threat, its 88mm gun, capable of destroying any American vehicle with a single hit. It advanced methodically up the center of the battlefield, seeming almost impervious to the shells that occasionally struck its thick armor. "That's Wagner's son!" Miller's voice came over the radio from his position with 2nd Platoon. "Has to be. Fighting style matches what his old man taught us in the last war, methodical, relentless, never exposing the flanks." Morgan studied the Tiger's movement through his binoculars. Miller was right. The tank was being handled with exceptional skill, maintaining perfect positioning to maximize its armor protection while systematically targeting American positions. "All units, priority target is Central Tiger. Converging fire when possible, but do not expose yourselves unnecessarily." Morgan's half-track edged forward to where he could better direct the defense, exposing itself momentarily as it crossed between covered positions. It was enough. The Tiger's gun traversed with surprising speed, its 88mm shell landing just yards from Morgan's vehicle, showering it with dirt and rock fragments. "Get down!" Walker shouted, pulling Morgan away from the exposed position as a second shell followed the first, closer this time. The Tiger had locked onto their command vehicle and was systematically walking its fire toward them, each shell coming nearer than the last. Morgan and Walker scrambled for better cover as their driver attempted to back the half-track behind a small rise. Too late. The third shell found its mark, striking the front of the vehicle with devastating effect. The armored plate crumpled under the impact, the shell penetrating into the engine compartment and igniting the fuel. Flames erupted from the half-track as the driver bailed out, his uniform smoking. "Command vehicle hit!" Lieutenant Romano's voice crackled over the radio. Captain Morgan's status unknown. Morgan keyed his handheld radio from his position behind the nearby rise. "Still here, Lieutenant. Continue the defense. All units maintain fire discipline and positioning." The destruction of the command vehicle seemed to embolden the German forces. Their advance resumed with renewed vigor, tanks pushing forward while infantry began moving up to exploit gaps in the American line. "We need artillery support now," Morgan radioed to the fire support officer attached to their position. "Danger close, coordinates Foxtrot 5 through Hotel 3. Negative Steel 6, came the reply. "Artillery committed to northern sector. No tubes available for your position at this time." Morgan swore under his breath. Without artillery support, the weight of German armor would eventually overwhelm their positions through sheer firepower and numbers. "Options?" he asked Walker, who had taken shelter beside him behind the rise. "We've hurt them," Walker assessed, studying the battlefield through his binoculars. "At least 8 tanks disabled or destroyed, but they still outnumber us significantly, and that Tiger is methodically eliminating our firing positions." As if to emphasize his point, an explosion erupted from the American right flank as another M3 took a direct hit from the German heavy tank. Their effective fighting strength was now reduced to 7 operational vehicles against at least 15 German tanks still advancing. Morgan made a rapid decision. Fall back to secondary positions. Controlled withdrawal by bounds. Each platoon covers the others. The order was acknowledged by the platoon leaders, who began coordinating the intricate movement required to disengage from the enemy while maintaining enough firepower to prevent them from simply overrunning the retreating vehicles. As the American forces began their fighting withdrawal, the German advance seemed to gain confidence. Tanks that had been cautiously probing now pushed forward more aggressively, sensing victory within reach. "They think we're breaking," Walker observed. "Let them think it," Morgan replied. "The secondary positions give us better firing angles anyway." The secondary positions were located approximately 400 yards behind their initial line, situated on higher ground that offered improved fields of fire across the entire front. Morgan had identified the location during his earlier reconnaissance, recognizing its potential as a rally point if the forward positions became untenable. Alpha Company executed the withdrawal with the precision of veterans, each vehicle moving in turn while others provided covering fire. The Germans attempted to exploit the movement, pushing forward rapidly, but disciplined American gunnery exacted a toll for every yard gained. By the time the last American vehicle reached the secondary line, 3 more German tanks lay burning on the battlefield. But the Tiger remained operational, its massive guns still dominating the engagement with methodical, devastatingly accurate fire. "We need to take out that Tiger," Morgan stated the obvious as he joined Miller at an observation point overlooking their new position. "Everything hinges on neutralizing it." "Easier said than done, Cap," Miller replied. "We've hit it at least 4 times, barely scratched the paint." Morgan studied the battlefield, noting how the German attack had become increasingly focused on the Tiger's advance. The heavy tank had become both the spearhead and the centerpiece of their assault, with lighter vehicles providing support rather than leading the attack themselves. "They're rallying around it," Morgan observed. "It's become a symbol as much as a weapon." An idea began forming in Morgan's mind, a desperate gambit, but one that might change the course of the battle if successful. He turned to Miller. "Sergeant, remember what you told me about my father at Saint-Mihiel? The flanking maneuver that saved his company?" Miller's weathered face creased in thought. Then understanding dawned. "You're not thinking." "I am," Morgan confirmed. "The Tiger is focused on our secondary line. It's not watching its flanks." "Because it doesn't need to," Miller pointed out. "That armor can shrug off our guns from any angle except directly behind, and even then it's a challenge." "We're not going to shoot it," Morgan explained. "We're going to capture it." Miller stared at him in disbelief. "Capture a Tiger tank? With what? Harsh language?" "With this," Morgan replied, holding up a satchel charge identical to those they had used during the night mission. "One man gets close enough to place it on the rear deck, near the engine compartment, not to detonate it but as leverage." Understanding dawned in Miller's eyes. "Force the crew to surrender or be blown up with their vehicle." "Exactly. And not just any crew. Wagner's son, commanding the centerpiece of their attack. The psychological impact would be enormous." It was audacious to the point of insanity, but desperation had pushed them beyond conventional tactics. Their ammunition was running low, their vehicles were dwindling in number, and without some dramatic change in the battle's dynamic, they would eventually be overwhelmed. "I'll go," Miller volunteered immediately. Morgan shook his head. "No, this one's mine. You're needed here to coordinate the defense if I don't make it back." Before Miller could protest further, Morgan continued. "Have 3rd Platoon create a diversion on the left flank. Draw the Tiger's attention that direction. 2nd Platoon concentrates fire on the infantry screen to keep them suppressed. I'll approach from the right, using the burned-out vehicles as cover." Miller wanted to argue, but recognized the determination in Morgan's eyes. It was the same look he had seen in Thomas Morgan's face decades earlier, when he had led the charge at Saint-Mihiel that saved their company. "Your father would be proud," Miller said simply, "and terrified, just like I am." Morgan clasped the older man's shoulder. "Keep them fighting, Wrench, no matter what happens." With the plan established, Morgan gathered the necessary equipment, a satchel charge, his pistol, and a German phrase book Peterson had provided, containing the essential surrender terminology he would need if he reached the Tiger. 30 seconds of covering fire when I reach the 3rd disabled tank," Morgan instructed Walker, indicating a knocked-out Panzer IV approximately 50 yards from the Tiger's current position. "After that, I'm on my own." Walker nodded, his face tight with concern, but professional in its focus. "We'll give you the window, Cap. Make it count." Morgan moved out as 3rd Platoon began their diversionary attack, drawing German attention and fire to the left flank. He stayed low, using the undulating terrain for concealment as he worked his way toward the field of destroyed vehicles that littered the space between the opposing forces. The journey was agonizingly slow, each movement measured and deliberate to avoid detection by German infantry or observation from the tanks. Shells continued to impact around him as the battle raged, throwing dirt and fragments that sometimes landed uncomfortably close. When Morgan reached the first disabled vehicle, a burned-out American half-track, he paused to catch his breath and assess the battlefield. The Tiger was approximately 200 yards ahead, still methodically engaging American positions with its fearsome 80mm gun. German infantry moved on either side of it, using the massive tank as mobile cover as they advanced. Morgan continued his cautious approach, moving from one wrecked vehicle to another, drawing steadily closer to his target. The noise of battle masked his movement, and the German infantry's attention was focused on the American positions to their front, not on the seemingly empty space behind them. When Morgan reached the designated Panzer IV, he keyed his radio once to signal his position. Seconds later, American guns opened up in a coordinated barrage, concentrating fire on the areas around the Tiger to suppress the supporting infantry and draw the heavy tank's attention away from its vulnerable rear. Morgan moved now with greater speed, covering the open ground between the Panzer IV and the Tiger in a crouching run. His heart pounded in his ears, each step carrying him closer to either success or death. 50 yards, 40, 30. A German infantryman turned, spotting movement where none should be. His shout of alarm was cut short by Morgan's pistol, but the damage was done. Other soldiers began turning, raising their weapons toward the lone American charging their position. Morgan threw himself into a final desperate sprint as bullets kicked up dirt around him. 20 yards, 10, 5. He leaped onto the rear deck of the Tiger, scrambling for purchase on the smooth metal surface as machine gun fire swept just over his head. The German tank crew, sealed inside their armored behemoth, remained unaware of his presence on their vehicle. Morgan worked quickly, securing the satchel charge to the engine access panel and setting the detonator to manual trigger. Only when it was firmly attached did he slam his pistol butt against the commander's hatch, creating a metallic clanging that would be clearly audible inside. The hatch opened a crack, a puzzled German face peering out to investigate the noise. Morgan jammed his pistol into the opening, shouting in phonetic German from Peterson's phrasebook. "Halt! Ergeben Sie sich oder sterben Sie!" Stop, surrender, or die. The German's eyes widened as he took in the American officer on his tank's rear deck, and the pistol aimed at his face. Words were exchanged inside the vehicle, too rapid for Morgan to follow with his limited German. Morgan held up the detonator for the satchel charge, ensuring it was visible through the partially open hatch. "Explosive! Surrender now!" For a long, tension-filled moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the hatch opened fully. A young German officer emerged, hands raised. He couldn't have been more than 25, his features bearing a striking resemblance to photographs Morgan had seen of Colonel Wagner in the intelligence files. "Ich bin Oberleutnant Dieter Wagner," he said, his English accented but clear. We surrender. One by one, the Tiger's crew who emerged from the hatches, hands raised in surrender. Morgan kept his pistol trained on them, scarcely believing his desperate gambit had worked. German infantry nearby had ceased firing, confused by the sight of their centerpiece tank's crew surrendering. "Tell your men to withdraw," Morgan ordered Wagner. "Now." The young officer hesitated, pride and duty visibly warring with survival instinct. Finally, he gave a sharp order in German. Along the line, German infantrymen began falling back, their advance stalled by the unexpected development at its center. Morgan keyed his radio. "Steel 6 to all units. Tiger neutralized. German forces withdrawing. Maintain defensive positions and covering fire." The battle didn't end immediately. Some German units continued fighting, either not receiving the withdrawal order or choosing to ignore it. But the momentum had shifted decisively. Without the Tiger's devastating firepower and the psychological impact of its presence, the German attack lost its cohesion and purpose. By 0630, the last German forces had retreated beyond effective range, leaving the battlefield to the Americans. The Echo Line had held, though at significant cost. Of Alpha Company's original 17 vehicles, only 5 remained operational at the battle's conclusion. Casualties had been heavy on both sides. As the sun rose fully over the desert battlefield, Morgan supervised the processing of the Tiger crew prisoners, paying special attention to Lieutenant Wagner. The young German officer maintained a stoic dignity despite his capture, answering questions directly but volunteering nothing. "Your father sent you to finish what he started at Kasserine," Morgan said, making it a statement rather than a question. Wagner's eyes flashed with surprise before he mastered his expression. "My father taught me that Americans lack the resolve for sustained combat, that you break under pressure." A thin smile crossed his face. It seems he was mistaken in this case. "We learn from our mistakes," Morgan replied. "Something both our armies have in common, I suspect." The young officer nodded slightly, a professional acknowledging a professional. "You fought well, Captain. Your men are a credit to your army." It was high praise from an enemy, especially one raised in the proud tradition of the German officer corps. Morgan accepted it with a nod, then handed Wagner over to the military police for transport to the rear area. Colonel Williams arrived as the last prisoners were being processed, his staff car raising dust as it approached the American positions. For once, he didn't look displeased as he surveyed the battlefield with its numerous destroyed German tanks. "Captain Morgan," he acknowledged, his tone neutral but lacking its usual edge. "Division headquarters reports the German attack has been repulsed along the entire front. Your sector appears to have borne the brunt of it." "Yes, sir," Morgan replied. "They concentrated their heaviest assets against our position." Williams nodded, making notes on his clipboard. "Casualties?" 23 killed, 49 wounded since the beginning of yesterday's engagement. 12 vehicles lost, including my command half-track. "And German losses?" "Confirmed 28 tanks destroyed or disabled, including 3 Tigers. Infantry casualties estimated at over 100, 9 prisoners including the son of Colonel Wagner, commanding the Tiger Company." Williams looked up sharply at this last piece of information. "Wagner's son? That's significant." He seemed to reassess Morgan with new eyes. "Division will want to debrief him personally." "Of course, sir. Military police are transporting him now." Williams surveyed the battlefield once more, his expression thoughtful. "You did well here, Captain. Better than I expected, if I'm being honest." Coming from Williams, it was effusive praise. Morgan simply nodded, too exhausted for any response that might reignite their professional animosity. "I'll recommend Alpha Company for a presidential unit citation," Williams continued, surprising Morgan further. "And there will be individual commendations as well. Your actions today helped turn the tide of this entire operation." "Thank you, sir, but the credit belongs to the men. They fought beyond any reasonable expectation." Williams seemed about to say more, but was interrupted by the arrival of a messenger from division headquarters. He read the dispatch quickly, then looked up at Morgan. "Orders from General Patton. Your company is being pulled into Division Reserve for rest and refit. Replacements and equipment will be prioritized. You move to the rear assembly area at 1400 hours." Relief washed through Morgan. His men desperately needed rest after nearly 36 hours of continuous combat. "Yes, sir, we'll be ready." As Williams departed, Morgan walked slowly among the positions where his remaining men were conducting maintenance on their vehicles, treating minor wounds, or simply resting in whatever shade they could find. Their faces were etched with exhaustion, covered in dust and grime, eyes shadowed by experiences that would stay with them forever. He found Sergeant Miller sitting on an ammunition crate, cleaning his pistol with methodical precision, despite hands that trembled slightly with fatigue. "So we lived," Miller said without looking up as Morgan approached. "Some of us," Morgan agreed, thinking of O'Malley and the others who wouldn't be returning home. Miller nodded, understanding the weight behind the words. "Your father once told me the hardest part of command isn't making decisions that might get men killed. It's living with those decisions afterward." Wise man. He was. Miller finished reassembling his pistol and looked up at Morgan, and he'd be damn proud of his son today. Before Morgan could respond, Lieutenant Peterson approached, a telegram in his hand. "This just came through from Division Communications, sir. Personal message." Morgan took the yellow paper, unfolding it with suddenly unsteady fingers. The terse military language did nothing to diminish the impact of its contents. "Captain Richard Morgan. Stop daughter Elizabeth Morgan born. 0330-14 March. Stop mother and child. Well, stop. Congratulations. Stop. Margaret sends love. Stop." Morgan read the message twice, a complex wave of emotions washing through him. While he had been fighting for his life and the lives of his men, his wife had been bringing their third child into the world. A daughter this time, born amidst the chaos of a world at war. "Good news, I hope?" Miller asked, noting Morgan's expression. "The best," Morgan replied, handing him the telegram. "A daughter, born this morning while we were in the thick of it." Miller read the message, a rare smile breaking through his weathered features. "Life goes on. That's what we're fighting for, isn't it?" "It is." Morgan took back the telegram, carefully folding it and placing it in his breast pocket next to the photograph of his family. Soon he would need to update that picture to include their newest member. As the morning progressed toward noon, Morgan completed his duties with renewed purpose. Reports were filed, casualties documented, equipment inventoried for replacement. Throughout it all, the knowledge of his daughter's birth provided a counterbalance to the losses they had suffered, a reminder that creation continued even amidst destruction. By the time Alpha Company prepared to move to the rear assembly area, news of their stand at Guettar had spread throughout the division. Soldiers from other units came to see the men who had broken the back of the German offensive, who had captured a Tiger tank and its crew through audacity and courage. Morgan found himself unexpectedly moved by the recognition. At Kasserine, American forces had been humiliated, their reputation tarnished by defeat. Here at Guettar, they had redeemed themselves, proving they could stand against the best the German army could offer. As the remnants of Alpha Company formed up for the move to the rear, Morgan took a final moment to survey the battlefield that had defined the past 36 hours of their lives. The desert landscape was scarred by shell craters and littered with destroyed vehicles, both American and German. It was a scene of devastation, yet also a testament to courage and resilience. Lieutenant Walker approached, standing beside Morgan as they both contemplated the vista. "Quite a view, Cap. One I hope never to see again," Morgan replied honestly. Walker nodded understanding. The men were wondering, "What will you name your daughter?" Morgan had been considering this question since receiving the telegram. "Elizabeth Miller Morgan," he said, "after Sergeant Miller, who's been watching over our family for 2 generations now." Walker smiled. "He'll pretend to hate it, but secretly be pleased as punch." "I know." Morgan turned away from the battlefield, facing instead toward the assembly area where his men waited. "Time to go home, Lieutenant, or at least as close to home as we get in this war." "Right behind you, sir." As Morgan walked toward his waiting men, he carried with him the weight of the past day's combat and losses, but also the lightness that came from victory and new life. Guettar had changed them all, forging them in fire as surely as the steel of their tanks had been forged in foundry flames. They had been tested beyond reasonable human endurance and had emerged stronger. Not unscathed, certainly not unchanged, but unbroken. And in the calculus of war, that counted as victory.